Are you ready? Okay. All right, good morning, everybody. I think we'll get started with our council meeting this morning. So, Madam Clerk, will you begin with a roll call, please?
Councilmember Baines, Councilmember Brand, Councilmember Brandow,
Here.
Councilmember Caprielio, Councilmember Olivier, Councilmember Quintero, and Councilmember Jean.
This morning, we're going to begin our meeting with an invocation by the Reverend Kenneth Wilson. So, Kenneth, if you'd approach the microphone, and when we're done praying, if we could salute our flag, and we'll begin our meeting.
Father, this morning we thank you for this day, for the blessings of life and health and strength.
From my council department, and that is a proclamation of National Public Works Week. So I believe Scott is going to join me up front. There he is. All right, Scott, I'll meet you down at the microphone. Well, one of the things that I've noticed, I think I've been here 1 year and 3 months, is this on? That's my first thing I'm noticing. Okay. One of the things I've noticed is how quick and effective and responsive our Public Works Department is. And so I guess I would believe, and don't take this bad, administration, but when I call administration, it takes them a little while to get back to me. They're kind of busy. When I call these guys, they're on top of it. And so I really appreciate that. And that's one of the things that I've noticed in my first year is how effective and competent and quick these guys are to our community's needs. And so I appreciate that. And we want to have a proclamation for Public Works Week. And so I'm going to have you guys all say a few words, or if you'd like to lead us in that. And then we'll read a proclamation.
All right. Thank you, Council President. It's an honor to be here, not for us to be recognized. I see Mr. Schuber's joining us. Come on up. Nationally, the mission of Public Works really entails not only what here in City of Fresno we look at as the Public Works Department, but it's everything from street maintenance to the planning, the engineering, to our water systems, our wastewater, from treatment plants to the distribution systems, including the mission of Fleet. And Jim Shad was not able to be with us today. He's out of town. And not just for us standing up here, for us to be recognized, but really as representatives of all the hardworking men and women who often are first responders, whether they're out there in the middle of the night with a broken water main, or joining our partners in public safety on something like running an excavator when we have a 3-alarm fire to help get debris cleared and make things safe. So it's an honor to lead and serve alongside with this great community and these hardworking men and women. So thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Would any of you guys like to say anything? Or Scott, why don't you introduce everybody?
All right. And standing here with me, I have Scott Tyler, who's currently serving as our interim assistant director over traffic and engineering services. Robert Anderson, assistant director for Public Works, our capital management division. Scott Crowder, assistant director over street maintenance, landscape maintenance, and also assistant director Jerry Schuber with public utilities with solid waste. So, and we have a couple other key folks who were not able to join us. Steve Hogg, assistant director over wastewater, and also Martin Kareen over the water division. So it's great to serve with these gentlemen and with council and the administration.
Thanks, Scott. And you guys are doing a fantastic job. Every one of these gentlemen has helped me at one level, and I know they help the rest of council serve our community. I'm going to read a portion of our proclamation this morning, and then we'll move on. Whereas National Public Works Week was instituted as a public education campaign by the American Public Works Association in 1960, calling attention to the importance of the various services provided by public works in our community, which are an integral part of our citizens' everyday lives, and whereas public works infrastructure facilities, and services play a pivotal role in the health, safety, and quality of life for the citizens of Fresno. Now, therefore, be it resolved that we, Mayor Ashley Swearingen, and the council members of the City of Fresno do hereby proclaim the week of May 18th to the 24th, 2014, to be National Public Works Week in the City of Fresno, calling upon citizens and civic organizations to recognize the contributions which the Departments of Public Works and Public Utilities provide every day toward our comfort and a quality of life. In witness thereof, we have set our hand to the affixed seal of the City of Fresno this day. Thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate everything you do. Thanks, Scott. All right. You know what? Okay. Should I present that? Let you hold that, Scott. Thank you, guys. Our next ceremonial is a proclamation of Latina Action Day, and that's from Councilman Olivier.
Thank you, Council President. Let's have Yamilet Rodriguez and the ladies from Hope come up and join me here. And while they're doing that, I can tell you a little bit about this group. It's Hispanas Organized for Political Equality. And this is a group that is extremely active in the 7th District and also in the city of Fresno. And perhaps some of my council colleagues have had some interaction with them. They have a great organizer and mentor in Yami Rodriguez, and they have a very vibrant membership. This is a group that comes to council with ideas for how they can change their community. But they're not just coming to council members and asking us to pass new laws or change laws. They actually go out and they change things themselves. In one of their most recent achievements was to meet with, gain the trust and friendship and respect of liquor store owners in the inner city and ask them if they could carry more fresh vegetables and fruits because it's good for the surrounding neighborhood. They did that, and they were successful. And these business owners have actually set up fruit stands and vegetable stands in their liquor stores, and it's working for them. But they don't stop. They're tireless. They keep coming back, and that's okay, because it's important, especially at this age, to get involved and stay involved. And I know that that's what you're getting these young women to do. And they went up to Sacramento in, was it April? And I saw you there in Sacramento, and it was a huge group. And enough from me. Would you like to say a few words about the group? Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman, and thank you to the rest of our council members. I know that you have had the opportunity to talk to our young people, and we thank you so much for that opportunity. I am so proud of these youth. We have our young people that are representing different high schools in the city of Fresno. We went to Sacramento not too long ago, and they got to talk about issues that are impacting them here specifically in the Central Valley. Access to healthy foods, access to education. And so they were able to express themselves, but also try to change things for the better in our community. So I want to give an opportunity for one of these gals. This has been only the third Hope Fresno Youth class, and I'm excited to have been able to be a part of the process and to mentor them. Also, my colleague Allison Grady has been an incredible mentor to them. But it's all about lifting up youth voice and having presence at the table, because young people are important and they know what is impacting them directly. So would one of the young people like to say something? You want to say something?
Oh, well, some of the work we've been doing is going to, we presented our ideas in a presentation to everybody else, of like everybody else that's in Hope, and the issue we got was healthy food access and like the image that Latinas are like see as their role models. And it was really shocking to us that we found out that many Latinas, young Latinas, don't see, like they see as their role models, like someone in the media, someone with like, you know, curvy and skinny and, you know, and they don't see like a mother or a teacher or like someone else that can like, they can look up to. So, well, we presented those issues and we've been coming up with ideas and to try to like change that. And we asked like young women to pay attention to their insides, like their good things about themselves instead of their outside. So like you can look at someone and be like, oh, you have a really nice sense of style, instead of saying like, oh, you look really cute today, because then that makes them seem like, oh, you know, I know how to dress, you know. Stuff like that. Okay.
I just let Magali know not even 1 minute before we came up here that she was about to speak, so that's nerve-wracking. But these young women are part of a statewide organization called HOPE, and so they represent over about 500 Latinas statewide. So thank you for this honor.
So we are here to proclaim Latina Action Day, and Madam Clerk, if you could read the proclamation, please.
Sure. Whereas Latina Action Day is an annual conference hosted by HOPE, and whereas HOPE stands for Hispanics Organized for Political Equality, and whereas Latina Action Day brings together 400 Latina leaders from all regions of California for an annual public policy issue conference in Sacramento, and whereas the Latina Action Day conference is designed to facilitate dialogue between corporate and community Latina leaders on public policy affecting Latinas in California. And whereas Latina Action Day takes place during the peak of the legislative session, just weeks prior to the governor's May revision of the state budget in order to most effectively reach elected officials on a wide range of issues. And whereas Latina Action Day concludes with the celebrating Latina leadership reception honoring Latinas in state legislative office and the gubernatorial administration. Whereas Latina Action Day provides a dedicated space for dialogue for Latina youth leaders at the Youth Town Hall as part of HOPE's Youth Leadership Throughout Literacy program. And whereas this year's Latina Action Day occurred on Wednesday, April 23rd at the Sheraton Grand Hotel in Sacramento. Now, therefore, be it resolved that we, Mayor Ashley Swearingen, and the Fresno City Council do hereby proclaim Wednesday, April 23rd, 2014 to be Latina Action Day in the city of Fresno. We thank HOPE for their efforts to benefit the Latina community in California.
Councilman Olivier, you might as well stay right there. You're in charge of the next proclamation as well, Bud Elliott Day.
Okay. Bud, come on up. I want you to stand up here, and anyone else that you would like to come up with you, or perhaps you're going to... Okay. Well, here. Okay. I'm very pleased to recognize Bud Elliott here. Everyone in this room knows Bud because he's been a fixture on our airwaves for more than 20 years. And his last day at KC24 News as their anchor is tomorrow. So it is a big day, not only in his life, but for the whole community. And I wanted to say this to Bud. You know, I was in news for more than maybe a dozen years. And it's every young person's dream when you get into the news. You really want to do two things. You want to win an Emmy, and it would be great if you could anchor for CNN. And I never accomplished either one of those things. But this guy did. Bud Elliott has had a storied career, an amazing career. He's won Emmys. He was, you started CNN, right? You were there when it began. He was there at the beginning of CNN, which is an international institution now. I had an opportunity to work with Bud 4 years ago. We were doing some radio news together, and it was at the end of my broadcasting career as a journalist, but I learned so much from you in the whatever how many months we worked together. He delivers news. It's concise. It's well said. It's so that everyone can understand, and it's accurate. And your retirement is a boon to you and a blessing to you, but it's a loss for our community. So I wanted and the entire council and Mayor Swearingen wanted to recognize you for your contributions to our community, and that's why we're proclaiming today Bud Elliott Day in the city of Fresno. And Madam Clerk, if you could read the proclamation, please.
Whereas Bud Elliott is retiring after more than 23 years with KSEE 24, the Central Valley's NBC affiliate. And whereas Bud Elliott's career began at KHOW Radio in Denver, Colorado, where he was the news director. And whereas Bud Elliott later became the news anchor at CNN-2, which became CNN Headline News. And whereas Bud Elliott was the main news anchor at the ABC affiliate in Richmond, Virginia, before coming to Fresno to anchor KSEE 24 in 1987. And whereas Bud Elliott is an Emmy Award-winning journalist and has earned several awards for excellence in journalism, most recently being recognized by the Fresno County Farm Bureau in 2013 for his work on a 4-part series, California Water in Crisis, focusing on the water issues faced by the farmers in California and exploring possible solutions. And whereas Bud Elliott will appear in his final broadcast on May 23, 2014, now, therefore, be it resolved that we, Mayor Ashley Swearingen, and the Fresno City Council members do hereby proclaim May 23rd to be Bud Elliott Day in the city of Fresno. We are grateful for the years you have dedicated to the high-quality journalism in the city of Fresno.
Of course we all want to hear from Bud, but I mean, Chad, do you want to say a few words? Chad McCollum is the news director at KC24 and also CBS 47, and I want to offer him this opportunity. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for taking the opportunity to go through this wonderful experience with Bud. So in this changing media landscape, it is such a rare thing to have someone working at a station for the sort of time that Bud has been able to be at KC and broadcasting in Fresno for as long as he has. It's an honor to have worked with you. I'm sorry that it wouldn't have been longer, but we do have some special things in the pipeline. I don't want to reveal too much, but you may not have seen the last of Bud Elliott.
Oh, no, he's...
Yeah!
He's not coming.
Thank you, Chad. Would you like to say a few words?
Just a few. Well, I'll keep it brief. Chad, you probably shouldn't have revealed that because everybody is saying, oh, no, he's not coming back again. But I did want to thank a couple of people who really have been very instrumental in getting us as far as we've gotten. My broadcasting career began 49 years ago in June of 1965 when I was a junior in high school, and I did radio in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it just kind of, I got sort of bitten by that bug, and it's kind of been with me all along. But when we came to Fresno in January of 1987, it was on the rebound from a job in Richmond, Virginia as news anchor at the ABC station. They had a management change and some people got bounced, and I was one of them, and I thought that was the end of the world, but it wasn't. It was the beginning of another world, and I got to hook up with Stephanie, and we did the news for 14 years together, beginning then, and then we had a little change, and I got to anchor with Faith Sidlow, who's the other person I want to thank, for 7 more years, and then I sort of went down to the minors and worked with Clint for a while in radio. but the next person I want to thank is Matt Rosenfeld, and I wish he was here this morning so I could thank him face to face. But he took a risk and decided to bring me back to the big show with the big boys, the big boys and girls on McKinley, not on G Street. And so I got the opportunity to anchor for another year with Faith and another year and a half with Steph. None of those things could have happened, though, if they weren't the people they were who helped and supported and taught me as much as I tried to teach them. They are, Steph and Faith are just the best, and I thank them. And I really didn't want to tear up because I want to hear the mayor's budget. And where is she anyway? Let's get started with that. Anyway, thank you very much, and it's been an honor to be your newsboy here for a few years in Fresno. It's the only job I ever wanted to do, and I got to do it for a long time. Thank you very much.
Going to the minors.
Now we got to get the posse up here.
Yeah, come on up.
Yeah. No posse. Alex, come on.
Oh, there you go. All right. Hey, Bud. Bud, Clint, Councilman Quintero would like to say a few words.
Hi, Bud. Well, not yet. No, I just want to thank you for all the years that you provided very professional news to the city of Fresno, and I want to thank your family for letting them share you with us, and enjoyed working the 2 years with you here that you were at City Hall. And one of the stories that I want to share about you is that I was running for office, and Bud called me up. He said, "I'm doing an interview of the candidates, and I got assigned to cover you for a little bit, just to say a few words." So sure. So we met over on Dakota Avenue at the Senior Resource Center, and it was he said, "I don't usually do this kind of stuff, but they gave me an assignment." And I said, "Oh, okay." So we talked about the campaign a little bit, and I gave him a little bottle of olive oil, and it had my picture on it. And he said, "You're giving these out?" And I said, "Yes, I'm going door to door." He said, "Well, I might be cooking some spaghetti tonight." I don't know. He said, "So this might come in handy." But anyway, to me, that was just kind of the beginning of getting to know you a little bit better. And, of course, seeing you on the news, it's like you're watching a family member, report the news. That's the way you delivered it. And it's always been very truthful and professional. And I really want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Sal.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Our next proclamation is Maritime Day, and that's from Assistant City Manager Renee Smith is going to lead us in that.
Good morning. Is Mr. Bob Hayes in the audience? Okay, well, I'll go ahead and present this. Just to give you all a little bit of background on what Maritime Day is about, it's observed on May 22nd, the date that the American steamship Savannah sailed from the United States to England. This event marked the first successful crossing of the Atlantic Ocean using steam propulsion. On May 20th, 1933, Congress declared May 22nd as the National Maritime Day. During World War II, more than 250,000 members of the American Merchant Marine served our country, with more than 6,700 giving their lives. hundreds being detained as prisoners of war, and more than 800 ships being sunk or damaged. In 2006, the Maritime Administration joined forces with the American Association of Port Authorities, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Waterway Council, Inc., the U.S. Coast Guard, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and other entities involved in the maritime industry to raise the awareness of National Maritime Day and the maritime industry as a whole. So on behalf of Mayor Ashley Swearingen and the City Council, we are honored to present this resolution today. And City Clerk, would you mind reading the resolution?
Whereas the United States Merchant Marine is a corps of men and women dedicated to enhancing commerce and protecting our national security. With a passion sense of duty, they transport cargoes and passengers safely across all bodies of water. And whereas in peacetime the Merchant Marines ensure freedom of trade by shepherding goods to keep our economy running and growing. In wartime they support our troops by carrying personnel and needed supplies to places of conflict. And whereas during the World War II, Merchant Marines were critical in providing necessary supplies and services to troops abroad while suffering extraordinarily high death rates. Hundreds of the merchant ships fell to enemy action, and nearly 1 in 26 mariners did not return home. In 1988, most merchant mariners served during World War II and were granted veteran status. Whereas in 1933, Congress designated the date of May 22nd every year as National Maritime Day to mark the anniversary of the May 22nd, 1819 departure of the sailstream-powered ship SS Savannah, which made the first successful transoceanic voyage using steam propulsion, shepherding a new age of maritime travel and transport. Whereas the United States vessels and those who operate them continue to be an integral part of our military operations overseas, they support operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as humanitarian aid missions and disaster relief efforts. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Mayor Ashley Swearingen, do hereby proclaim May 22nd, 2014 to be Maritime Marine Day.
Thank you. So just in closing, just want to say that this day reflects the gratitudes of Americans for the maritime industry and the benefits that it brings to our country. It also recognizes ships and seafarers who have held a special place in our nation's history. So thank you.
Thank you, Renee. All right. Now we are on to the approval of council minutes for May 15th, 2014. Madam Clerk, were there any changes to those minutes?
No changes were received.
Then do I have a motion to approve those minutes? A second? I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes 4-0. And now on to council member reports and comments. Any council members have any reports or comments this morning? All right, Councilman Quintero.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week we hosted the Neighborhood Watch program of Southeast Fresno hosted their annual fundraiser event, and it's basically sponsored by the Southeast Police Department. They cook a real nice tri-tip dinner and get a ton of raffle prizes, and they raise money for the Southeast. And want to thank Chief Dyer for being there in attendance, and Deputy Chief Foster and some of the other officers. But it had the officers were there serving, and it was just a great time. And we there was a lot of money that was collected for the Southeast, and Roz and Fred Clark were there as well. But we had a full house at the cafeteria at Senior Citizens Village, and just continues to grow each year. And I wanted to thank all the folks that worked hard on putting it together, and Chief, for your attendance. And he was mentioning about when he was the captain in Southeast Fresno, and he had hair, so a lot of the seniors didn't recognize him. So anyway, it was a good time was had by all. So thank you very much.
Any other council member comments? Councilman Olivia.
Council President, I would like to request that this council meeting be adjourned in memory of Joyce Robbins. Joyce was a constituent of mine in the 7th District and was a very active citizen. Called the office frequently to report situations in her neighborhood. And those are the kind of constituents that we want, that call in and let us know. And over the years, I was able to build a relationship with Joyce and found out within the last week that she has passed away. So I'd like to adjourn the council meeting in memory of Joyce.
We will do that. What was Joyce's last name?
Robbins.
Robbins?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Clint. All right. We are on to the approval of today's agenda. Madam Clerk, have there been any changes to today's agenda? Any members of the public that would like to address any item on today's consent calendar? All right. Any council members like to pull anything on today's consent calendar to discuss? All right. Do I have a motion to approve? Do I have a second? I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes 4-0. All right. Now we have a workshop that's going to begin in 20 minutes. Until that time, we're going to tackle some issues on the general administration portion of our agenda. We're going to go to General Administration 2C. That's an award, an agreement to Provost and Pritchard and the amount of $325,000 and change for the plan check services related to bus rapid transit, and that's from our Public Works Department.
Good morning, Council President, Council members, City Manager. Robert Anderson from the Department of Public Works. What we have before you today is an agreement with Provost and Pritchard in the amount of $325,811 for the plan check services to be performed on the bus rapid transit project. Currently, staff is unable to do the plan check due to the lack of resources we have internal, and so we wish to put this out to a consultant. On August 6th, we put out notice requesting qualifications for consultants to do the plan checking, and on August 21st of last year, we received 5 statements of qualifications. On August 28th, we interviewed the top 3 candidates and found to be Provost and Pritchard the most qualified consultant to do the plan check. So with that, staff is requesting that the council approve the contract with Provost and Pritchard for the plan check services on the BRT project and allow for the Public Works or his designee to sign on behalf of the city. That ends my presentation, and I'll be available to answer any questions if they may arise. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Any members of the public like to address this item? Any council members? We have a motion to approve, and do I have a second? We have a motion to approve and a second. All in favor? All opposed? Nay? So that motion passes 3-1. Councilman Brandau opposed. Now we are on to item 2D.
Council President, we need if that's the case, we need a majority of this. City Attorney, explain.
This item requires a majority of those present, which would be 3 in this case. Some items require 4, no matter how many are present, or potentially 5. This one is potential. This one could pass 3-1.
So it is passed?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
I checked first. All right. Now we are on to item 2D, a resolution, 42nd Amendment to the Annual Appropriation Resolution. And that is from our fire department. Chief, are you going to present that to us? Is that?
Pardon me. We would need at least 5 council members to vote on this item.
Oh.
That's correct. This is a budget amendment. At minimum, it requires 5 affirmative votes.
All right. We'll come back to D then. I didn't notice that note there. Item F, actions pertaining to the Ashland Avenue Traffic Synchronization Project from Blackstone to Peach, and that is our Public Works Department.
Good morning, Council. I'm Lal Gunwardina, Design Services Manager, Public Works Department. The item before you pertains to Ashland Avenue Traffic Synchronization Project from Blackstone Avenue to Peach Avenue. Staff recommends that the Council adopt the finding of categorical exemption pursuant to Section 15301C of the CEQA guidelines for the Ashland Avenue project and award a construction contract to Curtel Communications Inc., doing business at Sebastian of Fresno, in the amount of $533,792 for the base bid and add alternates 1 and 2 as the lowest responsible bidder for the Ashland Avenue ITS project from Blackstone Avenue to Peach Avenue. Thank you.
Are there any members of the public that would like to address item F? All right, any council members? This is in Council 4 and 7. So, Clint, this is in your district. We have a motion to approve. Do I have a second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes 4-0. I believe that we have a workshop starting in 15 minutes. I'm going to take any unscheduled communication at this time. Are there any members of the public that would like to address council on any issue at all? All right, thank you. City attorney or city? Oh, yeah. What's that? Oh, not necessary. Just step up and. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to. Good morning. My name is Cesar Casamayor. I'm a youth organizer with Building Healthy Communities, and one concern that I do have on regards to the upcoming budget is where's the youth in that equation. We lack programs, we lack safety. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have more safety officers patrolling the neighborhoods. But one concern that worries me is that we don't have a consistency on who's in our neighborhood to build a relationship, and that's one aspect of on regards to our safety. If we have officers that are always patrolling in different neighborhoods, it's hard to build trust. It's hard to have a good communication, and the cycle continues. No trust with the youth. Another concern that I have is the parks, understaffed, not sufficient programs. Sometimes, like the water faucets, for example, at Holmes Park, don't work. I've been at Frank H. playing basketball, and the things just don't work. So I'm a little bit concerned about not hearing much about what's going to happen with youth in regards to programs and activities and youth development for them. And I want to pass it on to my friend Michael.
My name is. Excuse me.
Yeah. We're gonna treat you separately, so you have brand new 3 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. So go ahead.
My name is Michael Williams. I actually teach dance over here at Holmes Park and Romaines Park, and I think that it's important that that a lot of the youth that live in the area that they get to see something positive, for themselves. And actually, dancing. The dancing that I do is a creative outlet for the youth, so they can express themselves. Because a lot of the kids that are in the area, they don't really have. I see that they need some type of activity that's really positive, and what I do is really positive because it builds their self-esteem, for dancing. So I would like to be able to, get more youth involved with that. And working with Cesar, we're trying to actually make that a community thing, because a lot of kids that live in the area, like they don't have too much opportunities, you know, and it actually gives them a chance to have some fun without being, you know, being like just distracted, you know, from like the environment that they stay in, you know. So that's what I wanted to speak about. Okay.
Job. We appreciate that input. All right. I'm looking over parts. Oh, and you too. I thought you were just taking a little video there. All right. You have 3 minutes as well. Introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. Good morning, council members, city manager. My name is Sabina Gonzalez Araña, reside at 2890 Huntington Boulevard in District 3. Here on behalf of Communities for a New California Education Fund, as well as Building Healthy Communities, here with these guys. We are, since the fall of last year, some of you may have heard, we have launched after some of the young people that we work with have been working with the school district to make a better investment in school climates and invest in English language learners and underserved students through the local control funding formula, we also recognize that the youth are really continuing to bring up the fact that their city, when they come out of school, they don't feel safe and they don't feel like there's anything for them to do, especially in your southern districts, right? But also throughout the city. And so in response to that need, we have begun to work with these youth to launch a community survey, launch a campaign really to seek partnership with the city as well as the school districts to invest in youth in a short term, but also in a long term manner. So we're really happy and pleased that yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, the mayor was quoted in the Fresno Bee saying that she was happy that we are working with a little bit more money for the city. And all of us do recognize that we do need to make an investment in city and fire, but we also see youth investment as a core city service. We see youth investment as crime prevention. And we really hope that this budget makes that a priority. We'll be back at every opportunity we can have, and we're hoping that we can have an opportunity with the council members as well as the city manager, the parks department, and the mayor's office to see if there's anything we can do to make a genuine investment in young people in the coming budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public like to address council at this time? All right. We are going to go to General Admin Item 2B. That's approve a contract amendment for the Blackstone Kings Canyon Bus Rapid Transit Design Services, and that is from our Transportation Department.
Good morning, Council. John Downs, Department of Transportation. You recall when we approved the Bus Rapid Transit project the last time, we made some changes in the scope of that project, including lowering of those platforms and changing the design of the shelters that are going to be around those stations. So what this is a contract amendment that is to adjust the contract, the design work for the design and engineering part of this project. The extends the length of the contract because the original project would have been finished in May 2015. This extends the project now. It won't be finished until May 2017 or December 2017. So this is the extension of the contract and amending the scope of the design work. The cost of the contract is $485,107. And if you have any questions, I'll try my best.
Right. Thank you, John. Are there any members of the public that would like to comment on this item 2B? All right. Any council members? Do I have a motion to approve? Do I have a second? We have a motion to approve and a second. All in favor? All opposed? Nay. Motion passes 4-1. Councilman Brandow opposing. All right. We've run out of items that we can tackle in 7 minutes. We're going to take a 7-minute break and be. We did that already. No, we did unscheduled already. So what he. You're right. Solution for an amendment to an appropriation with our fire department. So
Good morning, Council. Carrie Donis, Fire Chief. In front of you is a, excuse me, the Fire Department's requesting an amendment to the fiscal year 14 budget to account for the unbudgeted revenue and corresponding expenditures incurred and to be incurred in the fiscal year before fiscal year end. The revenues are from various sources totaling $1.349 million and $400, which will be received after the adoption of the budget. If you have any questions, there's detail attached as to where exactly those funds are coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Are there any members of the public that would like to comment on this item? All right. Any council members? Do I have a motion to approve? Do I have a second? I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion passes 5-0. All right. We are going to take a 5-minute break and resume at 9:30 with a workshop from our mayor on our city's new budget. Thank you. All right, you guys ready? All right. Hey, oh, when are we going to be graced with caps?
He's coming.
Oh, good.
He's in the bathroom.
Oh, perfect. All right, I think we're going to get started with our 9:30 workshop. Council members? And so the 9:30 workshop is the introduction of our new budget. And so, Mayor, glad to have you with us this morning.
Good morning, Council President and members of the Council. It's good to be with you today. This is a very common and familiar topic for us here in the city of Fresno, and I believe it's those of us who came in 2009, this is our 10th budget in 5.5 years. So it's a very common subject. I think we have a much improved picture to talk to you about today and to present to you. And before I jump into the presentation, and City Manager Rudd will follow, and then we'll both be available for questions, I just want to draw your attention to the cover of the budget. It is not a coincidence that it is an image of a really dark, cloudy sky over the city of Fresno, but a rainbow appearing over the city. In fact, this picture was taken of Fresno just about 6 weeks ago, and when we saw it, we thought, that's the picture for the cover of the budget, because it sends the message we want to send, which is we have certainly been through some stormy times over the last 5.5 years, but we're starting to see the rainbow appearing before the clouds. And though City Manager Rudd will certainly lay out the very prudent and cautious plan and approach that we believe we need to take over the next 5 years to make sure we achieve true financial stability, there's a lot to be glad about today. So with that, let me kick us off and just remind you these are concepts you all know well and that the administration has presented to you on several occasions. The goals of the general plan and our 5-year plan that's included in our budget are threefold: protecting public safety and, at a minimum, maintaining the current service level and improving services as soon as funds are available. Goal number 1. Goal number 2, support job creation by including minimal staffing increases to support customer service and economic development as we see the market begin to come back. And thirdly, restoring financial health, and that means paying off the deficit funds and the water litigation loan that we had to take out and building our reserve to about 10% or $27 million as quickly as possible. Now, you all know that all three of these goals are important, that it would be very easy to make a case for any one of the three. We'd all love to just focus on improving service levels in the public safety arena and do nothing else. We also could make a great case as to how nothing else matters if we're not creating jobs, which ultimately creates the revenue that funds city services. And as you all know, our auditors would tell you that the only thing that matters is paying off debt and building up our reserve, to the detriment of service levels and job creation. So we are all very familiar with the fact that we live in a world of tension and of balance. And so what we've tried to put forward in this year's budget is a balance between these three goals and equally addressing improvements in each level, in each goal. So some of the highlights that are in the budget this year, first of all, we're so pleased to be able to receive the SAFER grant, which will allow a fourth firefighter on 4 trucks. As you all know, thanks to our fire department, went out, competed, got the grant, made the case to the federal government, succeeded in getting the grant funds. There was a time, though, when we weren't sure whether or not we could receive the funds, because we have to remain committed to staffing those positions beyond the life of the grant, and there was some question as to whether or not we would be able to do that. And we certainly didn't want to bring on additional people only in 2 years to have to let them go. But in our 5-year plan, we've assumed the staffing increases that are provided in the SAFER grant, and that the general fund would fund those positions beyond the life of the grant, and that's included in our 5-year plan. The new fire company that gets created as a result, 4 additional cadets on top of the 30 that were added this last fiscal year, and we're fully funding those 30s for a total of 34 in FY15, 50 more police vehicles. We do have raises that are in contracts that we have to honor, and that's assumed in this year's budget and in the years forward. You also know about our $2 million initiative for improvements to neighborhood streets and road repair. That $2 million will be directed by council members. You all will determine what your priorities are, and we'll see some additional support for potholes and for street reconstruction. And we know that we need much more than just $2 million, but it's a good start. In addition, the bus rapid transit project, while not a general fund initiative, and the work going on in downtown, also included in the budget, but again, not out of the general fund. Funding for improvements at neighborhood and community centers, and when you hear the presentation by the Parks Department, you'll hear about some exciting upgrades and just some deferred maintenance that we're looking forward to addressing in this budget and in this next year. We've also added back something that some of you may recall way back a few years ago. We actually had money at the council district level, and you all could identify your infrastructure priorities. We've added that back to the budget this year, and that also is to be directed at your discretion. And then, as you'll see in just a moment, we do estimate that by the year 2019, we can achieve our target reserve level, our minimum reserve level, if we follow the plan. And then recycled water project and a number of other water capital projects are assumed in the 5-year CIP, which is included as part of the budget. Just a few more highlights. You all know that we've been working very closely with the federal government on the programs that are funded with our community development block grant funds. We've had to make some pretty significant adjustments to what can be funded with CDBG funds and what has to be moved to the general fund. We've been able to accommodate the federal government's recommendations that were included in their audit, and look forward to making those changes and being in compliance with the federal government. We've also included the BFF positions that you all approved. Those continue in this next fiscal year, and that is geared towards Public Works and Development Department and being able to handle increasing inspection work and also increasing permitting work. There's a particular issue that I know you may want to talk about in detail that relates to some temp employees that we've had on the books for many years. The Affordable Care Act has brought to light the fact that we need to make a commitment either to decrease the temp positions or go ahead and convert them to permanent positions. And there's a whole analysis that's been done to make a recommendation to you. That's included in the budget. All of our bond debt service is included. And then there's also general fund dollars going towards capital projects such as PD vehicles, fire equipment, safety, training, and technology. As I mentioned, the continued funding for the cadets, the 7 additional emergency services dispatchers, and the BFF staffing. So those are the highlights of the budget. We'll walk you through now the 5-year plan, and we'll probably just hit the high points, such as the estimates that are included in the revenue lines, as well as the strategy of dedicating any potential future payback from the RDA funds that are owed to the general fund, using that to fund the reserve, as you'll see on the next slide. That funding stream is roughly half of our plan to get to our reserve level by 2019. We don't know for certain whether or not those funds are going to come in, and so we're still being very cautious about whether or not additional service levels could be added beyond 2015. If the RDA funds come in as projected, then we can count on those dollars being used to build our reserve, and it may create an opportunity if other revenues are increasing to start adding back service levels faster. So with that, let me step aside and ask our city manager to come forward and walk you through the 5-year projection and the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, Council President, and the rest of the council. We're going to go over the numbers, and as over the last couple of days, while we have been talking about the fact that we are actually not talking about the B word, I guess the other B word that's come up in the manager and mayor's office is that I've been referred to now in the last couple of days as Bruce Bummer. So Bruce Bummer is going to be up here speaking to some of the realities that are actually before us. This budget is full of optimism, but it is also a real opportunity for us as an organization, the council, the administration, to change the course and not repeat some of the mistakes of the past, to chart a course forward that ensures the financial solvency of this organization. As you've heard me before, I don't think any of us standing here today or sitting want to go through what we went through over the last 4 years. I think we owe it to our community and we owe it to our employees to ensure that we adopt a path that mitigates the future downturn that we will see, because everyone knows the economy will turn south again. The drought and the situations that are facing this region is a good indication that how things could change very quickly from year to year. But with that, I'll try to put on a little bit of a happy face to some of this, but I also want to recognize the council as well as the mayor, as well as our employees for the last 4 years. We've had to go through and make some pretty difficult, well, not pretty, very difficult choices. And so while we may not have agreed on all the strategies going forward, as the mayor said the other day, we did weather the storm, and we could not have done that individually. It was a collective effort, and for that, thank you for your support and ongoing commitment to this community. So very quickly, the highlights. We are beginning and have been experiencing an uptick in sales tax. That has resulted in about an additional $2 million coming in. Property tax is also increasing. As we saw earlier in the fiscal year, property tax appears to be on the rebound. That is reflective also in the housing starts, which has resulted in not a significant increase over last year, but if you look at the previous year under charges for current services, that is an increase. And a lot of that is just being driven by development coming in, pulling permits, increased economic activity. On the property tax side, we went to great lengths to make sure that we could try to get to a number that is, there aren't any surprises. We're still trying to be somewhat conservative, but we don't want to be so overly conservative that we also understate the revenues. We have had a series of meetings with the county assessor, Mr. Dictos, to confirm, affirm, and reaffirm our assumptions. So these numbers that you have before you today with regard to property tax is based on a series of meetings with the assessor's office. On the expenditure side, the employee costs are going up. Some of that is due to the fact that we have employee pay raises that are tied to collective bargaining agreements. There are also an increase in the number of full-time positions. As the mayor pointed out, for a number of years, there have been departments that have had temporary employees providing city services whose tenure with the city could be as long as 5, 6, 7, 8 years with no benefits. So there's a couple things that we were looking at. One, the impacts of the Affordable Care Act, and after you get exceed 29 hours in a week, you're basically responsible for providing health care. And then also philosophically, if you have somebody who's been with us 7 or 8 years, you need to recognize that you need to fill that position on a full-time basis and just accept that's an operating cost. So you will see as time progresses, converting positions that have been temporary for a number of years into full-time city employees. I'm not even going to look over at the city attorney because he's also going to remind me that it's an issue for us as far as the code. When it comes to some of the other expenditures, you'll see we're going from 51.9 to about 56 million. Some of that is the $600,000 that the mayor mentioned, that part of which is going to be matched with CDBG, which will go back into rehabbing neighborhood streets. So our commitment to fund neighborhood street repairs is included in that, an increase in the council's infrastructure budgets this year, which you will have discretion to spend on projects that you believe are important to your districts. We're also continuing the replacement of our public safety fleets. We were running, for example, police cars that used to be replaced every 4 or 5 years are now extended out to 7 years. Last year, we leased 50 cars. This year, we're going to lease another 50 cars. We're hoping over the next 2 years, we will have turned that fleet over and gotten back to a regular cycle. We've made that same commitment with the fire department, who are running apparatus that are well beyond their replacement life or their useful life. Then there is also, as we get into the budget, you will see a significant investment into a number of our facilities, and I'm happy to say a lot of that's in the Parks Department. There's about $1 million of investment into our existing community centers. Nothing real sexy. We're talking about replacing bathrooms, air conditioning, things that should have been replaced, could have been replaced, but as we've talked about before, money had never been set aside for those kind of things. So this is the first step towards not only investing in public safety, but also, to a great extent, investing in the infrastructure that we need to provide a lot of the programming that you heard about earlier today. As you will see, at the end of this year, we're projecting that we'll have $740,000 as an imbalance. And we propose to take that in addition to $3.5 million that we estimate will come in from an RDA payment of obligations that were made years ago. We've worked with the city attorney's office as well as Marlene Murphy. This is the linchpin to our reserve. If these dollars don't come in or they are delayed, it will have an impact on our ability to meet that goal. And let me speak to that goal. At the end of 5 years, so here's the good news in the last year we were standing up before you and saying it could take us well over 4 to 5 years to pay off our debt and actually get to the point where we begin to build a reserve. And we're talking about a reserve of somewhere near $4 million. And as I've shared with you before, one pay period in the general fund is $7 million. I just left a meeting this morning, the state of Clovis breakfast, where they're touting that they have a 15% reserve. A 15% reserve. Our plan, while it's based on the RDA funds coming in, projects that within 4 years, we will have a 10% reserve. In fact, technically, if you look at revenues and expenses as they will increase over the next 4 to 5 years, it will actually represent less than a 10% reserve. So that is where I think the opportunity really lies. And I'll just quickly here again, graphically is representation of how we plan on going forward, the path forward to build that cushion, that reserve that we need and have so desperately needed for so many years. As we go forward, this will probably be the topic of discussion when it comes to our budget, and probably the biggest challenge as to what our priorities are. This budget, we believe, is a balanced approach. We're paying off our debt, and the debt is for things that we've already built or incurred. So we're paying off things that we've already done. We are incrementally making improvements to public safety, as the mayor said. There's the additional cadets, the additional positions in the police department, and we are committed to the chief that we will work hand in hand to keep those positions filled as quickly as possible, not to use attrition as a budget balancing strategy. But with that, we have to take a moment and recognize that in order to ensure the future solvency of this organization and our ability to provide service, we cannot and should not try to do a lot of things or too many things all at once. This community has a lot of needs, and they're all competing needs. But we also need to ensure that as we go forward, that we're not facing the same situation that we faced over the last 4 years. The reserve will be one of those things that folks will want to start talking about potentially, but I hope we've all learned over the last 4 years that it's vitally important that we have one. We do believe that by 2016 that we can begin building, and if additional revenues come in, then so be it, great. Maybe we can start building a little bit more. But I know over the last few months, as things have gotten better, we've heard, there's been discussions about how many more police officers can we hire, how much more can we put into street maintenance, how much more can we do. Again, all these competing priorities, and the question will be, at the expense of what? What I'm urging you today is whatever decisions we make, do not make them at the expense of the future of this organization. Keep that in mind. As I've said before in the recent weeks, we owe it to the community, and we owe it to the employees that we serve. So with that, that's my Bruce Bummer speech for this morning. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Right. Thank you, Mayor and City Manager. This is a workshop, so we don't typically go out to the public during workshops, so it's mostly for the education of council members. And so if there's any council members today, I've been informed by our city attorney, we can't go into a lot of detail. We have to wait 10 days to go into detailed questioning about the budget or anything. But there is an opportunity to make comments and generic comments about what you've heard today. So, Councilman Brand, you're up first.
Thank you. City Attorney, if I get on the wrong track, please bring me back. I want to first thank our mayor for 10 budgets. We started from the inception, and member Zhang was here even before that, and thank you for your leadership and really some dark times that we could have easily ended up like Stockton, but you made a lot of tough decisions that really saved the city, and thank you for the first budget where we're not actually laying people off. Question. Last year we put like $1 million in, I think it was called uncommitted contingency funds. And what is the difference between that and having it specifically earmarked for reserve? Is there a difference?
Council President, council members, yes, actually there was. The $1 million of reserve that you had identified was left in the general fund, but it was placed in contingency and in anticipation of it possibly having to be used. Mm-hmm. The reserve that is specified in the presentation that you just had is actually, pardon? Oh. Is actually the emergency reserve, which is used for very specific purposes and is restricted as to when it can be used and how it can be used. So there's a little bit difference as far as accessibility, if you will.
Okay, so it falls in the definition of the Reserve Management Act, yes, which defines
yes,
the whole process. Versus this is basically a short-term reserve, right? Uncommitted. We can at some point in time move that money permanently into reserve or spend it or whatever we decide. Correct? Okay. And I know the focus is on the general fund, and later we'll get into the enterprise departments, but in particular DPU, waste, solid waste, wastewater, water. But I know there's a direct interface between those operations, and we all know that there are implications and consequences of both. And I think two examples I can think of that enterprise departments can adversely affect us would be the downtown parking garage years ago that ended up being financed by the general fund as well as the DARM, that enterprise, when it was enterprise, that went into a deficit in large part due to SEGA. And, of course, the park bonds that were based on impact fees that really have never come. So down the road, I think we'd have a dialogue on that and the impact down the road it's going to have on the general fund. And I know we're starting to, put pieces together in this, and on the capital programs. There's the facilities that we all know, like the convention center, that need a lot of work. Infrastructure in general across the entire city, and we found that out about a couple of months ago on the asphalting and street maintenance, that we're putting a couple million a year, and the need is $15 million a year, right, Scott? And then, we're just doing the best we can, but somewhere down the road, that's, I call it the silent budget killer, and that's the infrastructure and these unfunded capital improvements all over the city that are going to, in time, really become problems unless we can find ways to address them. And of course, technology, we've talked about that, funding, the upgrades in technology that will make in my opinion, to a large extent, help in the business-friendly and the expansion, industrial expansion, and business expansion of Fresno. That would be important. And of course, the equipment, police cars, and all the stuff, and fire trucks that go along with that. But really, we're balancing our debt. We're trying to get that paid off, which I fully agree, the short-term debt. Building reserve, had we had a reserve in 2009, it would have been a lot easier on the city of Fresno. And of course, the pressure to continue all the funding operations, police, fire, parks, public works, they were all trying to, slowly, incrementally bring back up, and of course, the capital improvements. So I look forward to a healthy debate, and I'm glad to see we're finally making and I like the metaphor on that page about there's dark clouds, but there's a rainbow behind it. Thank you. Bruce?
If I could, Councilmember Brand also raised, thing I failed to point out. One of the other things when it comes to the enterprises, and I can tell you there's good news, and as you pointed out, there's not so good news when we're dealing with our solid waste and potentially even our water fund. But on the other side, both the airport and our transportation department are well on their way of building their own operating reserve that will sustain them during the time in which they're waiting to be reimbursed from the federal government. But part of this reserve is needed to deal with cash flow. And we haven't been talking about cash flow lately, but it's still an important issue to understand. At any point in time, this organization writes checks for things such as a road project in which we're waiting for reimbursement from the federal government. And it's millions of dollars. Well, that's okay maybe sometime in the middle of the year, but when you get to the end of the year when you're trying to close out, you need to have cash. You need to be in order to cover those checks. It's like having a receivable on the books, but nothing's come in yet. So you've already wrote the check, you've already paid the expense, but you're still waiting for your customer or whoever gave you the grant to pay that. So at any point in time, and near the end of the year, you could be looking at needing $9 to $10 million just waiting for something to come in for like public works. The enterprises, again, there's a different story, and two of the enterprises are on their way of not relying on the general fund to cover that float. But just inherently, we have other departments, such as Public Works and the Police Department and others who rely on CDBG, for example, who are incurring expenses, but we're waiting for the federal government to be reimbursed. So keep that in mind as we talk about the reserve.
On the, hopefully, all these things we're doing will impact our credit rating and improve our credit rating. If that is done, I think we're about a double B plus now, and we were like a double A minus to begin with. Yeah. So if we can return to that status in a couple of years, will that open up like trans and commercial paper and those credit lines that would help alleviate that gap that we have on these, delayed reimbursements from federal grants and state grants. Right. Okay, so the cash flow problem.
Because we'd have the liquidity to cover that during that time. That's what they're looking for.
Lee, you're done? Councilman Shong.
Thank you, Council President. And I'll just start where Lee kind of left off. It is does feel, at least for me, kind of a deja vu, coming in on the Mayor's Autry's last budget on a high note, and then it dropped fairly quickly. And I'm not saying that we're there on the high note yet, but to see the positiveness of the 7-8 years of work to get to where we are hopefully to be, and the issues and concerns that Member Brand states will continue to be there. But as you know, too, parks has always been one of those battles that I've fought for a while, and I've seen some investment in there. And you've heard some of our youth or those that advocate for our youth are here, so I'm hoping that they have an opportunity to engage our new parks director, that they are also updated as to the things that we're doing in parks to allow for those additional activities as we partner with the school districts and other activities that we do to make sure that our youth are engaged. So I just want to make sure I add that piece in there for our partners out there that they're talking with a new parks director. Hopefully they have an opportunity to talk with them and look at some of the things that we're looking to do for that side and that part of our community. But I'll end with this. It is about whether we call it the BFF or Prosperity Fresno or how it goes. I think that still continues even from the time the previous mayor to even now, that we still are hearing at some level the same type of issues of getting processed faster. It's still somewhat inconsistent. There are those that have a great experience. They come in, they will vouch that we provide the best services that they've ever seen. And then we'll still have those that says, and I've heard this throughout the 8 years, I will never come back because of the experience that I have. So there has to be a balance in how we do that, because that does impact in terms of how we do. And I think this budget hopefully will begin to look at those shortcomings that we have, because it is, what you say, Mayor, to address the economic development piece that we want, and then also the face that the city wants to show, and how we want to attract and be a partner with all of our business, whether they're big investors to the small mom and pop investors that want to be a part of this revitalization effort that I think it's happening. So appreciative of the report, as you said, Bruce. A lot of optimism, but I think there's a balance of caution as well, and we'll definitely be having the discussion about the budget reserve. Thank you.
Councilman Quintero.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you for the rainbow analogy. Hopefully there's a yellow brick road at the bottom of that as well. But I also think that, or believe that you're telling us as well to be cautiously optimistic, and I appreciate that as well. What I'm starting to feel or see, just as a sense of community, is that we're heading a little bit more toward a healthier budget, creating a type of vibrancy in our business community, as well as getting our neighborhoods a little bit more, having the opportunity to get our neighborhoods a little bit more taken care of. And that's something that's very heartening, that we can go and tell the folks in our district, to share that optimism with them. And I to some degree, I feel that they're starting to also feel the same way in terms of what you presented, Mayor. So I wanted to thank you for that. A couple of things that I wanted to address, and I hope that they'll touch on them in the budget. I really haven't had a chance to see that. Is basically within the departments, is that I'll start off first. I think about 2 or 3 months ago, Luis and I had a lunch meeting with you and Bruce, and we kind of gave you a wish list about 10 items that we were interested in, and seeing if anything could be done in District 5 to take care of them. And a few things have gotten taken care of, but I hope that there'll be some monies in this budget that we can start moving forward on those, and getting those addressed. And I think some of those were tied into Measure C monies, and some of those have been taken care of with the bus canopies and that type of thing. So really appreciate that. But I'd like, those were basically the 8 or 10 things that really were important to us in District 5 that off that wish list that we had. The other part too that I think would be helpful in helping us achieve a little bit healthier monies in our city coffers is that I understand there's about 5 or 6 ordinances that are existing that the city attorney's office has completed, and then forward them on to planning department for comment. And basically those are having to do with signage for the banners and convenience stores, digital signs for businesses and that type of thing, that I've been told that we probably wouldn't get any comment back from that department until the fall. And to me, if we're having to wait till the fall to get comments so that we can move forward on some of those projects, well, we're losing money. So if you could look into that, I'd appreciate it. And then as far as the neighborhoods go, and we're getting a few more calls on it, and it was Councilmember Capriolo that brought this up, is the concern that the people have of the trees in the park strips, that the roots go into their sewer systems, and you have an elderly person in their home who's lived there and then having to put out $1,000 to get it cleaned out, and the city says, well, we can't take the tree out, or we can't reimburse you. And that's one that Councilmember Capriolo brought forward, and that's an ongoing concern in a lot of our older neighborhoods throughout the city. And then, of course, the street repairs and those of us also. There are some concerns in our community center parks that we have, but those are pretty much the things that we'd like to see addressed in terms of District 5. And I want to thank you also for the open communication that we have with you, Bruce and Renee. Anytime we have a question or need anything answered, at least you pick up the phone and you can hang up on us, which is fine. But at least you're breathing on the other side, so that's good. But that, and then the other part too is we've had a little bit of time to work with you on that project that we mentioned to you, and Mayor, for Peach Avenue, that's still moving forward, and we got some pieces put in place on that we'll be sharing with you as well. And of course, you're a big part of that. So I want to thank you for all that, and just those are some of the thoughts that we had from our District 5 side of it. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President.
No problem, sir. Councilman Baines.
Thanks, Council President. I'm going to echo some of the sentiments of my colleagues. Obviously, we can tell we're moving in the right direction, so I think that's a good thing. I like the idea of us talking about trying to balance what we're trying to do is put money in the reserve, increase service levels. I think that's the right approach, as you guys know that I feel. A couple just high-level observations. I really appreciate, like Councilmember Zhang said, and I think Councilmember Quintero, really appreciate the emphasis on parks and some of our community centers. I think that's an awesome thing. Where my heart is with that. So I appreciate you finding ways to maintain our centers better. And I know it's just the first step, but at least we're moving in the right direction. I do want to, though, I did notice that as far as public safety is concerned, the PD and fire, we're still kind of well below where we're going to want to be. And I wanted to ask, if I can, the numbers that we're projecting for the coming 5 years, are we contemplating, even with attrition, making sure that those are our minimum levels? Is that the idea with that? Okay. So I just kind of wanted to make sure I understood that. Okay. Obviously, I'd like to see more staff with our public safety. I hear a lot of calls in the office about the response times and such and so forth from PD. Seeing what's happening with our fire season here, know that we're kind of short there. So, but I know that's obviously a larger discussion than this. But overall, I'm pleased with the direction it seems that we're going.
Councilman Olivier.
Thank you, Council President, and I just wanted to thank the mayor and city staff for all their effort in putting this together. You know, I'm also encouraged to see the return of infrastructure dollars. And I've heard in my 3.5 years here, I've heard the positives and the negatives and both sides of infrastructure dollars and do they really work? Well, I have found out that they do really work. And it's there have been so many places where we've been able to actually make a difference in the neighborhoods using infrastructure dollars in years past. And so I am a believer in them, and I know that the people who are up here use them wisely and take it very seriously. It's a responsibility, and they will be used wisely. And so very pleased to see those return, and thank you for all your hard work.
Right. That concludes our comments, I guess. Mayor, did you want to say something else?
I did. I just wanted to recognize Jane Sumter, our budget director, and her incredible team that work literally year-round to keep us on track. And whether it's mid-year updates, 5-year plan updates, or an annual budget, they never miss a beat. So we're really grateful for what they do and are often unsung heroes in the city of Fresno, but they're really the support and the foundation that make all of the other services we provide possible. So I just wanted to say thank you, Jane, and thank you, budget team.
Yep, and Jane, I would like to add thank you as well. We've already got the calendar set for budget talks starting on the second half of the day on June 5th. But I want to remind all council members on the front of today's agenda, it outlines the budget talks and what departments will be discussed on what day, so you've got that information as well. So thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Bruce and Jane, for today's workshop. In a few minutes, we're going to have a second workshop, getting back to the general admin portion of our agenda. It's going to be on public transportation, so as soon as we get the computing. And this workshop is a public transportation planning and policy workshop. It's being put on by our city manager and our transportation.
I'm standing here before you today, hopefully, for the last time, as your director of transportation. Councilmember Zhang mentioned that he's looking forward to having our nonprofits and our community groups enter into a dialogue with our parks director. So yeah, I'm also pretty happy that there will be a conversation going on with the parks director, and it may not be me, as well as issues regarding public transportation, because we do have a new director of transportation coming on board. I am looking forward to going back to the 11-hour days. So nevertheless, the presentation that's being made before you today actually originated about 8 or 9 months ago. There were some discussions, as some of you know, about restructuring our fixed route system in anticipation of bus rapid transit. But before we did that, I requested that the department have a study conducted to determine what the originations or the origins of trips and destinations where people are going. And then also to evaluate where there may be some opportunities for changes in the system. Now, Tony Mendoza from Parsons Birkenhoff and Jarrett Walker will talk about first the data collection. I know some of the council members were engaged early on. They will go over the findings as well as what will ultimately become a policy discussion regarding the allocation of future resources. From that, we will then hopefully, there is a group of 3 council members who have committed to continue working with the department and the new director as well as the city manager on the next phase of this this project or this study, in which we will actually go out and start introducing some concepts to various groups to get their feedback. That will then come back to the full council, similar to what we did with the convention center, as recommendations for the department as it continues to grow, and where resources should be invested and how they should be invested. With that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Mr. Mendoza, who will start off the presentation.
Hello. Thank you for having us today. I'm Tony Mendoza, as Bruce mentioned, and I'm here today with my colleague and friend, Jarrett Walker, and we've been working hard for you to examine your transit system and to try to find efficiencies, and are here to present our early results, some network alternatives that have resulted from that work, and to generate a discussion on how we move forward from here. So some of the project objectives we were given when we started this task was to assess and implement the plan to improve services, look at the linkages, increase productivity, and increase the cost effectiveness of your system. We're framing the analysis in 3 different tenets of customer service and safety, long-term policy goals, and cost effectiveness. And our process has been, to date, we've been through the fall of 2003. In October, we surveyed the bus systems of Fresno and Clovis, and we also have done an extensive customer outreach and stakeholder interview process. From that work, we have developed some network alternatives, and currently we are vetting those alternatives. And through this public meeting and through some workshops we held in March, and also starting today, we've begun an online survey, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So some of the data that we've collected for system performance is examining where the frequencies are in the system. You have a brand new database available to you that we've used on your automatic passenger count system on your buses, so we're able to get down to the route and time, exactly where and when bus stops are being used and how much. We can break those out by weekdays and weekends, so we've done that as well. And we've looked at your route productivity, your boarding rides per hour is a good measure for us to see how well each line is actually performing. Most of your system is actually performing very productively. The line 58 there on the end is an exception, and that is a special service that has special funding with it, so that's a special case to consider as we look at the system. When we actually compare the fax system to other systems throughout the state and comparable systems throughout the region, the fax system is incredibly productive at over about 47 rides per boarding per vehicle hour, and that is a very strong indicator of just how efficient this system is. So we're challenged, and we welcome the challenge to to examine potentials for efficiencies in your system as we start to examine it. So when we first looked at the system, we looked at what are the current productive lines and less productive lines and mapped those out. And as I mentioned before, there's not very many unproductive lines. To try to understand where your markets are, we've done a state-of-the-art analysis, and for the first time, we've used anonymous cell phone data. So if you or I are standing here and we have our cell phones and we've stopped for a couple of minutes, the cell phone tower is able to ping us and determine that that's a place of rest or an origin or a destination point. And then we take that data and are able to compare what people's movements are throughout the day and define those as major markets and where people are moving from, coming from, and going to. We compared that data to land uses in your region and define what factors were those that would generate the most transit ridership. So looking at densities, population, and employment, looking at the income levels and whether or not people own a car. Those are very strong indicators of where you could capture transit ridership. So putting those 2 points together, we identified 7 maximum potential markets that we decided to dig down deeper into and use those for where you could get more ridership. The anonymous cell phone data collected was also paired with some onboard survey data that we did in October 2013, where we got 3,700 responses on the fax and stage line systems, and we're able to take that data and compare origins and destinations and try to define out if you have all these people making these trips on cell phone, using the cell phone data, and you have all these people that you know are riding transit, and there's a disparity. There's a gap there. That's an indicator of where you might have a market that you're not catching on transit right now that you potentially could. So that was how we analyzed it, and these black circles indicate the strongest markets on the left with the anonymous cell phone data, and then on the right, where we grayed out the circles, that indicates the O&D survey information that those markets are currently being served. So we netted those out. This is transit service to downtown. And then we compared that to, we modeled your transit travel times. One of the biggest impacts that you have to affecting your transit travel times is just how long a person has to wait for a bus. So if the bus is coming an average of 30 minutes, the modeling takes that as a 15-minute hit to you immediately on your average wait time for a bus. So these colors here indicate the different transit travel times available to your system. The 15-minute travel time in downtown, so trying to get to downtown Fresno, the amount of coverage you can get is just identified in that small little 15-minute area. From going from 15 minutes to 30 minutes, you're covered in the brighter gold color, and from 30 minutes to 60 minutes is the darker gold color. So that's how this map reads. Indicating there, if the black circles are within one of these areas, we indicate that as a potential transit market to capture. Finally, we looked at the makeup of the demographics within that data, and if they was a low vehicle household, that indicates the strongest potential for a transit market. So we did this for those 7 areas throughout the city and identified all those areas that were ripe for potential transit increases or improvements to increase efficiency and ridership. So now we have all that data and are able to take that and package it into network alternatives. We also examined who is riding transit today in our origin destination survey. I'll run through these one at a time. The riders have many purposes, which is a strong indicator of why you have such an efficient service. You're appealing to a broad market. The transit riders transfers is an element that we were asked to examine. Should we be providing more direct service to the destinations? And for the most part, most people can get to their destinations within the region from just one or no transfers. Existing riders are happy with the service. There was only 15% of the people that were not happy with the service, and a qualifier here is that people are self-selected on this survey because they're already riding. So that's an indicator that we could look into further as we develop the networks. The travel time that most people experience on the system today, most are satisfied with that. Some of the interesting elements that we learned about customers were, regardless of how they use the system, regardless of income, race, or whatever, these elements about how people would like to see improvements in the system were constant, such as improving internet access and information at bus stops were two repeated themes that we heard about what people wanted to see in the system. For stakeholder input, we've had over 30 stakeholder interviews. I think most of you were contacted at some point by either me or the Rios company helping to do our outreach. We asked about policies, efficiencies, safety, and customer service. On the onboard survey, we also asked similar questions to get at those issues. And we held workshops in March at Fresno State and Fresno City College. So some themes that we heard coming out of those under long-term policy goals were really land use centric, about increasing infill and development around downtown is a potential way to get efficiencies, looking at assessing developer fees for increased service to outlying areas so that new service would be more cost effective that way, kind of like that 58 service I mentioned earlier. Support fare increases to improve service, provide incentives to take the bus. These were all common themes and ideas that we heard. For cost effectiveness, we categorized those into 2 areas, those that could potentially improve efficiencies, such as better aligning the service with high schools and colleges, looking at late night commuters services to address those different travel markets of people, say they have a job, they get off at 10 o'clock, or a student who has late classes, those kind of elements we heard constantly through our stakeholder interviews. We did hear some areas, some suggestions to improve coverage, such as improve coverage to southeast Fresno and reviving the Route 12. So those were some other themes that we heard throughout the stakeholders' interviews. For customer service and safety, looking at different ways to improve the bus stops, improve the information at bus stops, consider the safety of bus stops. An example is the stops near Fresno State were repeatedly mentioned, maybe perhaps bringing stops closer or into Fresno State itself. Communications for the Hmong community were revealed that there's potentially better ways that we can do that, and cleaner, friendlier, safer buses. There were some themes that we heard. Now, we packaged all that information together and have now developed some network alternatives addressing those, where those markets are, what some of the themes were we heard from the stakeholder interviews, and I'm going to turn it over to Jarrett Walker now to describe what those alternatives are.
Thank you very much. Members of the council, what we have for you here are some network alternatives, and the purpose of these alternatives is not that we're necessarily going to recommend one to you, but rather that they illustrate a philosophical choice about public transit that you, the council, will ultimately need to think about and need to form your own view about. The question, and that question is really, when you run public transit, is your primary objective to carry as many people as possible, to have as many riders as possible, or are you running public transit as a social service where the mere availability of the service is its own good? And we'll come back to that in a moment. First of all, let me be clear. When we say that certain service is predictably high ridership, let me clarify a little bit about what we mean by that. Generally speaking, in the business, we all, those of us who've been designing transit systems for many years, know that that we see high ridership in response to these three features of the built environment: density, walkability, and linearity. And let me just explain each of those for a minute. Because a bus runs down a street and stops at a stop, what goes on around that stop, how many people there are, how many jobs there are, how many reasons there are to travel to that place, is the first-order estimate of the size of the market. So, of course, more stuff going around the stop means more ridership, and the word for how much stuff is going around in a fixed area, that's what density is. So density is our first-order measure of the size of the market, and that's why density always correlates strongly with ridership. Walkability, then, you visualize the area around a bus stop. The next question is, of those people who are near the bus stop, how many can actually walk to it? And there are, in some parts of the city, for example, where you have communities behind sound walls, the walk distances can actually be quite long and quite difficult to get to a bus stop. And that means lower ridership potential, because fewer people can actually get to the stop in a way that they're going to find convenient. The other really fundamental part of walkability is that in almost all cases, public transit is serving stops on opposite sides of a major street. And to complete a round trip, everyone, regardless of which side of the street they're on, has to be able to walk to both of those stops, because they're going to leave from one stop in the morning, they're going to get back to the other stop in the afternoon. So the other important part of walkability is it safe to cross the street at or near the bus stop? And that's also a very strong indicator of ridership potential. As you would expect, if we put two stops on either side of the street, but it's not safe to cross the street there, we really haven't offered a round-trip service, because it's not possible to use the service in both directions. The third issue is linearity, and this is something on which Fresno has a great advantage, and one of the reasons I think why your ridership is so astronomical by the standards of the industry. That is simply that it's relatively easy in Fresno to drive in a straight line. We don't have many cases where we have to meander through nooks and crannies. There's a little bit of that on the southwest side of the city. But by and large, that's an advantage to transit in Fresno generally, because people don't like to ride around on circuitous paths, and you lose them very quickly if you require them to do that. So this is the real question that's going to come back to council at some point. And I'll describe it quickly in terms of a fictional urban area. So here's a fictional city, and those dots are people or jobs. So where the dots are close together, that's density. And there are some straight streets that have lots of density along them, and then there's lots of people living all over the place at lower densities on curvy streets. It's a lot like most American cities. Well, if your goal were actually ridership, what you would do would be to think like a business does when it's trying to maximize the number of its customers. And what a business does is to choose which markets it will enter. When you're chasing ridership, you don't feel an obligation to low ridership places. You're chasing ridership. And as it turns out in transit, the most successful way of doing that is to concentrate very high quantities of service on the streets where all of the built environment features that I listed are most favorable to transit, where you have the density and the walkability and the straight line that you can follow. And what that tends to mean then is, and the reason you get that outcome is because frequency is so powerful. So if you take your budget of buses and you put them on fewer streets so that you can run them more frequently, well, many people don't have access to service at all, but the ridership outcome comes from the fact that a lot of people have really, really useful service. The thing to remember about frequency is that as we get up to a bus coming every 15 minutes or better, we start to eliminate transit's biggest disadvantage with respect to a personal vehicle. And that disadvantage is waiting. That disadvantage is the fact that transit is not going when you want it to go. It's not ready to go now. But as you get frequencies up better than 15 minutes, a lot of people start perceiving that actually the bus is going now. It's going whenever I need it. And so we start getting an exponential kind of ridership payoff that you'll see in your own network when you look at the fact that your most frequent lines are the most productive. And thinking about the math, productivity is ridership per unit of cost. Frequency increases the cost. It ought to pull that ratio down. But in fact, the highest frequency routes are the most productive, and that gives you a sense of the exponential payoff of frequency. High-frequency service is simply useful in a completely different way than your typical bus route that runs every 30 or 60 minutes. So if to the extent that you're pursuing a ridership goal, then that's what you're implying when you measure productivity or when you expect your staff to deliver higher ridership on the network, but only certain kinds of services actually do that. The opposite goal in the history of transit, that every transit system is also expected to do to some degree, is a coverage goal, and there the performance measure is really availability. So when someone comes to you and says, I need transit in my neighborhood because I really need it, and you say, okay, but only 3 people ever rode that bus, and they say, yes, but I really need it. Okay. They're asking you to implement a coverage goal, which is to say service not in response to demand, not in response to ridership potential, but in response to a perception of need. Okay? And so my suggestion is that we simply be clear about that, and I'm going to try to be clear with you about which services are which, and which services are serving which purposes, so that we can have a clearer conversation about what balance of those two purposes you want to have in your own policy. Because I'm sure you want, almost all cities want a mixture of these. So the coverage goal, if you think about your imaginary city, has the effect of running lots and lots of bus routes that get all over the city, more or less regardless of density. But as a result, there aren't very many buses on any route. In other words, the bus isn't coming very soon, which means it's not likely to be very useful, which is why the ridership is lower when you spread the service out like that. So that's the trade-off that we're presented with. That's just the mathematical fact about how transit works. The interesting question is what policy you want to arrive at based on that reality. When we think about the things that people routinely ask elected officials about when they're talking about transit, we hear all these kinds of ideas. So we hear the idea that transit should think more like a business. Well, that's what the ridership goal does, and that has certain consequences. A ridership goal tends to produce that sense of more fair revenue, lower subsidy levels, a fiduciary outcome. On the other hand, the ridership goal also produces all of your environmental outcomes. We do not reduce vehicle miles traveled. We do not get cars off the road by running buses that are empty. We get it by running buses that are full of people who would otherwise generate car trips. And so the high ridership scenario is also the scenario that delivers your environmental outcomes. Meanwhile, the coverage goal, though, is the scenario that meets a tradition of public transit as a social service, where there's an expectation that it be available regardless of whether it's being used. It's just a different philosophy of what public transit is and what kind of service it is. And it tends to be associated with lifeline access for everyone. There are small numbers of people with extreme transportation needs scattered all over the city in places where any bus you run to them is going to be a pretty empty bus. And they will say, yes, but I really need it, and here's how my life would be ruined if I didn't have it. And that's an entirely valid conversation, and that's how you get coverage services, by and large. So my point is that transit agencies, and in this case you are the transit agency, need to think about their point on the spectrum. Where do you want to come down? And the question I usually encourage councils to get to is a direction that says, devote this percentage of our budget to chasing ridership, and this percentage of our budget to chasing coverage. And that gives you a kind of discipline that when you get a demand or a request for a service in a particular low ridership area, you've got a firewall in your budget, so you're only going to so you're not going to inadvertently cut ridership services in order to grow coverage services. At least you won't do that without intending consciously to do that. You'll have moved the firewall. So the idea of a firewall in the budget is ultimately just so that you can track each service that you run according to its actual purpose. Too often we just look at the total aggregate ridership of a transit agency and we don't stop to think about, is this transit agency trying to maximize its ridership? Well, no transit agency is, that I've ever worked with, trying to maximize its ridership with every service it operates. Some of them are coverage services. Everyone knows they're low ridership. That's part of the understanding. Now, here's what's remarkable about your system. Most transit agencies I study and talk to, I analyze their existing system, and I say, oh, your existing system's about 50-50. About half of it's where it would be if ridership were the only purpose. That was our finding in Houston, for example. Sometimes it's 70-30. In Fresno, about 90% of your service is where it would be if ridership were the only objective. There's remarkably little coverage service now, and I'm about to show you exactly which ones they are. So what's unusual in Fresno is that the room to maneuver is rather small. There's only about 10% of your service. So where you are right now with the existing system, about 90% of your resources are deployed for maximum ridership. You could take that to 100% by deleting the last coverage services. You could also choose, no, we want more coverage service. We want to be able to say yes to people who come to us with demands for service to hard-to-serve places. In that case, you could consciously choose to swing the pendulum the other way, to devote less of the budget to ridership, more of the budget to coverage, and that would mean you should expect ridership to go down a bit. This is all, let's be clear, in the context of a fixed budget. So I'm talking right now in this whole conversation about a fixed pie. We can have a separate conversation about what would happen if the pie grew. But at least in the context of a fixed budget, then obviously we're talking about shares of a fixed resource being divided somehow between these two opposite goals. And that's fundamentally the question. So now let me show you some maps. And we did these hand-drawn partly because we wanted to emphasize how fundamentally sketchy they are. They're not meant to be final recommendations. They're just illustrations of an idea. Your existing system, and I'll call your attention here to the legend, where we use red on these maps to denote 15-minute frequency all day, a bus coming every 15 minutes all day. Now, the thing to remember about that threshold is that in the industry, that's generally the frequency at which people start experiencing the service as something they can rely on, as something that's going to come whenever they need it, rather than something that they have to schedule their life around. If you have 30 or 60-minute services, you are scheduling your doctor's appointment around when the bus goes. You are scheduling your job shift around the bus goes. One of the major problems of 60-minute service is that you may have the choice between getting to work 2 minutes late or 58 minutes early. So that's why nobody uses it. That's why only people who are in the most desperate need are going to use that kind of service. And that's why 60-minute service, for example, has absolutely lousy ridership wherever you offer it anywhere in the world. 30-minute service is somewhat better, but really it's the 15-minute threshold at which people start experiencing that they can go when they want to and the way that works with their lives and their commitments. So right now you have no 15-minute service. You do have in the purple a little bit of 20-minute service. That's basically Blackstone, Cedar, First, and a route that goes out Fulton, Van Ness, and then zigzags over to Cal State, and East Ventura, Kings Canyon. But most of your network is 30-minute services. Now, one of the things we could do is respond, for example, to requests to put back Route 12 in the southeast, respond to all of the requests that we've gotten in the course of this process, ideas for new places that transit should go. And that's what this scenario is. So in this scenario, a whole bunch of new green lines appear. There's a new green line going out in the southeast that ends up at Malaga. There's a new green line, an hourly bus that goes all the way out on the west side of the freeway, all the way to Highway City, covering all kinds of nooks and crannies that you don't serve very well now. And then there are new dial-a-rides. Dial-a-ride is basically demand-responsive service. It's something you can call for. It'll pick you up. It's a suitable service for very low-density areas where the street pattern is also not very conducive to transit or to walking. And so we threw in one of those. One of those is in the old Route 12 area, what's called the Dial-a-Ride 71 there. And the other is way up in the far northeast in that growing area. And so that's sort of responding to to all the requests we heard in the course of this process. And that gets you down to a point where you're spending only about 85% of your budget on ridership and 15% on coverage. You could look at this and decide there are even more places you want to go, in which case you could turn it even further away from ridership and toward coverage. So this is the coverage scenario. It's an illustration of that extreme. What did we have to do this? We had to turn frequencies on the main ridership lines down from 20 to 30 in order to pay to spread this service out to these new areas. Okay? You're either going to concentrate it or you're going to spread it out. That's the nature of the product. Now here's the opposite scenario. What if you just wanted to maximize your ridership? What if that was the only goal? What if you were truly thinking like a business, run service where we'll have the ridership? Your network would look more or less like this. So 15-minute services start to appear. And a couple of interesting things start to happen here. One of the things that starts to happen that's very important to mobility is the high-frequency grid. So where you see these red lines, it's important not just that there are red lines, but also that they're forming a grid pattern. Because where you see two red lines cross, that's a really easy connection. And what I want you to visualize is that as frequencies get to that 15-minute level, a pedestrian on transit starts being able to navigate the street grid just the way you do as a motorist, which is when you're driving around Fresno, unless you're using the freeways, mostly you're making L-shaped trips. You're in a big grid, so you go over and up or over and down. That's exactly the way you'd go on transit, and it's a matter of taking a frequent bus to a transfer point. The service is frequent, so the transfer is easy, so you get turned. It's like turning at the intersection, and then you're going in the other direction. The amazing thing about the high-frequency grid, and the reason why it is the foundation of the incredibly productive bus systems in Los Angeles and a number of other comparable gridded cities, and the reason that many cities try to create a high-frequency grid even though they don't have a gridded street network, the reason we see that is that the magic of the high-frequency grid is that you don't have to pick favorites because it goes from everywhere to everywhere. It doesn't focus on downtown or on any one particular destination. It has this everywhere to everywhere usefulness. But the frequency is expensive, so it isn't truly everywhere. It's not going to go out West Herndon. It's not going to get to Malaga. It's not going to get to a lot of the low ridership places. But in the high ridership city, which is pretty much what this is a map of, that gives you really good mobility. And obviously, if you had more resources, all of the blue lines on this map could support being red lines. All of the blue lines on this map. Remember, you are an incredibly productive system, and one of the striking things about your system is that you have so few unproductive routes. Mostly there's just a lot of very high ridership across almost all the system. Here, though, in the dashed purple lines are what disappears if ridership is your only objective. So those dashed purple lines are your current low ridership services. Now I want to emphasize, when I say that West Herndon or East Ashland are low ridership services, they are low relative to your astronomical ridership. In Sacramento, the 30 boardings an hour that West Herndon, East Ashland gets would probably be considered pretty good. But in your environment, where the resources are so limited and the demand is so high, they are, relatively speaking, low ridership routes. And so in the context of Fresno, if I were asked to maximize ridership inside the existing budget, if that's what you wanted us to do, this is what we'd do. And the dashed purple lines are what we would cut. Those are predictably low ridership for reasons of built environment that I explained earlier. Either they're not walkable, they're not dense, or we have to cover too long of an empty distance in order to get to some destination. So, for example, the East Ashland segment. That segment exists primarily because of a developmentally disabled workshop and some other social services which are located on the east side of the airport. There's no good high ridership transit corridor that gets anywhere near that. So that's a problem presented by their location choice. If you chose to have a 100% ridership policy, what you'd be saying to them effectively is take responsibility for your own location choice. We can't get out there because it's not a high ridership thing to do. That would be a very, very extreme position for a council to take, but it's in the range of your options. It's in the universe of your options. So the other dashed lines there, you see, the whole the newly developed northeast area north of Nice Avenue. You see the northwest, the West Avenue and Fruit Avenue segments disappearing. You see West Herndon disappearing. You see Malaga disappearing. That's what transit run like a business looks like. It's focused on where it can succeed. So again, the reason you have opposite scenarios here, the reason you have this coverage scenario before you as well is to illustrate what the opposite principle is. The opposite principle is we're not as focused on ridership. We're focused on getting some service out to everyone who needs it. And so the suggestion of the firewall in the budget is simply a way to make a policy decision about how important each of those goals is to you in dividing up a fixed budget. So those are basically the trade-offs. As you increase ridership, if you're aiming on ridership, the percentage of the city that's covered by any service goes down because we're not interested in running mediocre service that nobody rides. We're not trying to spread it thin. The coverage scenario, that's precisely what goes up because we are spreading the service thin. We're running lots of hourly services to get close to a few more people. On the other hand, the real payoff of the ridership scenario is that it increases the percentage of the city that's covered by frequent, in other words, useful service that lots of people are going to find useful in their situation. And the coverage scenario does the opposite. Within that network, and for the average person, not of course that there are any average people, the travel time benefits tend to be positive on the ridership scenario. Because remember, please, that frequency, waiting time is, in the scale of trips that are being made around a city of your size, waiting time is really the most onerous part of the transit trip, rather than the in-vehicle travel time. And that's why we attack frequency and not just running speed. The support for land use intensification, if you're interested in the ability to redevelop along some of your historic major corridors, you need high-frequency service there to do that. If you want somebody to choose where to live and become a customer for a development based on wanting to rely less on cars than other people do, they have to be on a service that's coming all the time. And that's also, by the way, running late into the evening and weekend. Let me make one other interesting point in passing about the ridership scenario, because this is easily misunderstood. Late in the evening, you see buses out there pretty empty. And it's easy to say, well, that's low ridership service. You'd cut that too. That's actually not how it works, because what people want and respond to is a complete service day. If somebody goes to work in the middle of the day and gets home and gets off work somebody goes to work at 4 p.m. and gets off work at 10 p.m., a typical restaurant shift. You're not going to get their ridership if they can't get home at 10 p.m. If they can't get home in the evening, they're not going to make the trip outbound either. They're going to have to use some other mode. The other thing about evening service is that lots of people we find that as we cut evening service, we lose ridership earlier in the day. And so evening service actually, although you look at the bus and people will call you up and say, hey, you're running these ridiculous empty buses around. But evening service is insurance. Its whole point is you're not using it, and yet it turns out to be very important to the success of the whole network. That's why the ridership scenario does not skimp on evening service. In fact, it invests a little more in it, and the most frequent routes in the ridership scenario run in that scenario all the way to midnight. So we can get everybody home from the restaurant and retail jobs that are letting out huge numbers of employees at 10 and 11 p.m. College students appreciate service at that hour too, to a great extent. The other thing that's very important in the ridership scenario is that it gives you the resources to expand more fully into the weekend. Another thing to remember about your traditional transit markets, they're mostly not the 9-to-5 commuter. They are people traveling mostly to jobs and commitments that are not 9 to 5. They're all over the clock. The restaurant, retail, service sector, and the college student experience, none of which is really about 9 to 5 commuting. There's a big morning rush. There's a bit of a morning rush. But it's not a very peaked system, and that's actually tremendously to your advantage because peaking is an extremely expensive and inefficient thing for transit agencies to deal with. But one of the other things that means is that the weekend days are looking increasingly like the weekdays, and that the most successful systems we're seeing are increasingly trying to get to a weekend service pattern that looks a lot like the weekday midday. Because you think again about the retail and service sector jobs. If you work in a restaurant, it's all hands on deck on Saturday. You're not going to get Saturday off. You're going to have some weekday off. And so your total job prospects are about being able to get around on the weekend as easily as you can get around on a weekday. So that's an important other thing that the ridership scenario does. So please be clear, when we talk about, it's safe to talk about high ridership and low ridership places, but it's not safe to talk about high ridership and low ridership times because the service at the low ridership times is often an essential part of the total ridership outcome. So that really is the core question I want to raise with you today. And we're not asking for action today, but we want to preview the question for you in case it's something that you choose to give direction on at some point. I have a few more comments about other ridership improving things you could do, but let me stop here and take questions and discussion about this issue perhaps first, if you think that's appropriate.
Just want to remind everybody that this is a workshop, so it's really not a chance for the public. It's mostly for council to get educated on this issue. So, Councilman Baines, you're up first.
Thanks, Council President. And I'm not exactly sure if I should let you finish before I.
Well, Council President, if you prefer that I finished, you know the rest of my material.
Because I see we still have several pages of presentation to go. I don't know if it.
Yeah, but really, this last part is not much longer in all reality, if I remember correctly.
It's not much longer. I can go through it if that's easier, so that you have everything.
Why don't we go through it? If you're thinking,
yeah,
maybe
I don't want to be redundant if I don't need to be. And I don't want to get a blah blah award for, asking a question that he covers later.
The point of this slide is that's sort of my whole spiel about that basic trade-off that we'll be having to think about. There are, however, some other things you can do that I think would further improve ridership, in the context, of course, of ridership already being astronomical. And these are mostly capital projects, which I encourage council to think about and to be looking for opportunities to pursue to proceed on. In many cases, these are capital projects that save operating dollars, which is usually a good trade-off in the long run because operating dollars are eternal and capital projects are one-time. There are a number of issues around the downtown transit center that I think are relatively low-hanging fruit. The arrangement on multiple sides of the courthouse square creates problems where the stops for connecting buses are very far apart, are not always in clear sight of each other, and that raises safety concerns in the evenings and also some concerns from the other tenants around there. You also have some wasteful operations due to the inability to terminate a bus line at that location. And remember, when we can't terminate a bus line where the demand ends, at its logical endpoint, we have to drive further just because we can't end there. That requires us to do something much less efficient that gets in the way of deploying the optimal network for the optimal number of riders. There are also lots of issues with the signage, which needs updating and clarity. And I think generally, too, that there are some opportunities to improve the whole legibility of the network, which I'm working with staff on. River Park is also an area where sooner or later you're going to need a transit focal point or transit center. That's because in the natural geography of the city, you have a whole bunch of north-south demand lines that all basically run into the barrier and want to converge onto a single point so they can connect with each other. River Park is the place where that naturally happens. It's the end of the urban grid, and so where you run into the river, and so all of these north-south corridors really need to be brought together. And brought together at a point where it's easy to make connections. Right now, these routes are all making enormous loops, which means they're convenient in one direction but not the other. Transit has to be useful in both directions if it's going to be useful. So those big loops at the ends of lines are always a problem. Really, you want to bring things two-way to a destination where people can get off any bus and onto another bus. And sooner or later, that's going to need to be found somewhere in the greater River Park area. So that's a long-term project to be thinking about. And again, it will save you some operating dollars if you have more efficient paths. CSU, this is the pedestrian experience that a CSU student experiences if they try to get out onto Cedar to use the buses in that direction. There definitely needs to be a better arrangement for the huge numbers of students coming to and from CSU in terms of the streets they have to cross, where they have to go to get to bus service. That has to be balanced against avoiding deviating bus service too far out of direction. But there's a project needed, and I know CSU is already very interested in this, to pull together an idea for an appropriate facility on their campus, but also a facility that's close enough to Shaw and Cedar that the buses are not being taken too far out of direction. There's some low-hanging fruit around legibility. Compared to a lot of other cities, I find that your signage at this network is speaking in code. My job, of course, involves going to a new city every week and having to learn the network very quickly, and I find that other cities are much better at helping me figure it out very quickly. Signage that's used, this signage is used, these big signs at the transit center are useful if you already know the code of the route numbering system. But imagine how much powerful it would be to have signs that just say Blackstone, Palm, Fresno Avenue, that advertise the actual product of where you can go from here. And that's the sort of best practice signage that I encourage you to look at. And similarly with the overhead signage on the buses, if you look at a sophisticated system like San Francisco's, you will see that they are carefully saying, this is the street the bus runs on, that's where it ends up. And there's that consistent pattern to the signage that everyone in San Francisco recognizes and knows how to read. And so as a result, you get a lot of essentially kind of passive marketing of the service. The overhead sign is telling people, imagine if the sign going down Blackstone just says Blackstone to River Park, and how everyone seeing that would get a little advertisement. Oh, okay, that's what the bus does. Right now, the speaking in code, it's not having that effect. And so finally, and then the other thing I want to chat with you briefly is about stop spacing. Now, this is a little bit like the ridership coverage trade-off, too, because the history of tending to want to create a service whenever anyone asks for it is also shown up in the history of tending to put in a stop whenever anyone asks for it, until you end up with lots of stops, and in some cases, stops very close together. Now, when you have lots of stops very close together, it means the bus is stopping more frequently, and it means that people are not being asked to gather at a single stop where they can be served more efficiently. That's another ridership downer. It makes the service slower. It makes the service less reliable. It also, by the way, consumes more on-street parking spaces. So one of the things that's odd about your current policy is that it maximizes, it says the optimum spacing is every 0.2 miles, but that's not actually an option presented by your half-mile arterial grid. Your options are really the half-mile, the quarter-mile, or something less than that. Our recommendation is that your policy over most of the city should really be a stop every quarter mile. And that has to do with the rhythm presented by the high-frequency grid, by the half-mile grid, of the structure of your city, which is that you're obviously going to stop every half mile where you've got a major intersection. So the question is, do you stop once in between them or twice in between them? And we suggest that once is enough. One of the other reasons for this is this whole issue about safe crossing of arterials. We are starting to see transit authorities being sued because they dropped a passenger at a place where it was not safe to cross the street. That passenger tried to cross the street there because their apartment building was on the other side. They got hit, and the transit agency was one of the parties sued. So be aware that when you place a stops on opposite sides of a street at a place where it's not safe to cross the street, it's not really clear what you've offered. Because, again, you can't complete a round trip without walking to the stops on both sides of the street. And so the stops are only useful if you can cross the street there. So one of the reasons to go to quarter-mile spacing is that it becomes more realistic in cost terms to be able to imagine eventually getting to a safe way to cross the street every quarter mile. Now, be in mind, I'm talking mostly about the big, fast boulevards, the Cedars and Shaws and those kinds of streets where street crossing is a really dangerous issue and a really major issue. I'm not talking about Olive Street through the Tower District or downtown, where you have a more intimate urban environment like that, where there is a lot more walking, where pedestrian crossings are relatively easy. It probably makes sense to stop a little more often. But most of your city is these big, fast boulevards, and that's most of what we're running on. And so thinking about coming up with a standard policy about that, rather than responding to every individual's complaint, is a very efficient way to come up with, to give staff clear direction so that we know. And there are some other interesting benefits. If you think about that quarter-mile rhythm, then at that quarter-mile point, if you have a safe street crossing, that also means that if somebody is going to locate something that's going to generate transit or pedestrian demand, like a Social Security office, you want to encourage them to locate it right there. If somebody's going to locate at something that doesn't, like a car dealership, yeah, put that not at the quarter mile point, but over here in between them. There are ways then for land use to naturally take advantage of a more consistent message from the city about where signalized or otherwise safe crossings will ultimately be, generally on that quarter mile spacing principle. And so just an example, looking at Kings Canyon between Willow and Peach. I actually wrote about this in this case study in my book. You've got your typical half-mile spacing. Halfway in between them, you've got a Walmart. You've got, on the north side, you've got an apartment complex on the south side. You can see how the Walmart and the apartment complex jointly are a good reason to have a signalized crossing there, but just one signalized crossing. And you're more likely to be able to get that signalized crossing, for example, as part of the development agreement when the Walmart redevelops or whatever, or to be able to afford that signalized crossing if you want just one in this segment, as opposed to trying to need two because you have land uses in slightly different places. So the quarter-mile bus stop spacing ties very directly to an approach to traffic engineering that says, let's try to get the safe street crossing once per quarter mile, which then also creates new kinds of development opportunities where if you care about pedestrian access in particular, you'll tend to want to be, if not at the half-mile corners, at one of the quarter-mile corners. So recommended policy is to aim for a stop every quarter mile, a little closer in pedestrian-friendly areas in the older street grid. Now, right now, by the way, your downtown stop spacing policy says you should stop every single block downtown. You don't, fortunately. But that's what the policy says. You can imagine how slow the buses would be if you actually did that. A reasonable downtown stop spacing is probably more like 800 to 1,000 feet. That's 3 lettered streets or 2 named streets in the downtown grid, just to give you a sense of how far that is. 3 lettered streets or 2 named streets. But then also I think to be conscious of this issue and to think about whether it's ever appropriate to place facing stops on opposite sides of the street at a place where you would judge it's not actually safe to cross the street. And you don't want to encourage people to do that because that's effectively what those stops are doing. And then finally, just to wrap it up then, the real interesting thing that, the real bigger question for you to think about over time is whether you want to get to a policy on service purpose which helps you which helps to establish how much of your budget you're monitoring for ridership outcomes, how much is not about ridership but is about a competing coverage purpose. So with that, I'll stop and invite your questions and comments.
Thanks, Jarrett. Councilman Baines.
Thank you for that presentation. I know for sure that a lot of us here have been waiting for this study and for this presentation. So thank you very much. Before I ask you all questions, I wanted to invite Rick Stites up. Rick, did you have any thoughts on this briefly? I'm not going to put you on a 3-minute timer, but stay close to that.
The department gave me the opportunity to have a preview of this. I've seen it a month or so ago. At this point, I'd just rather reserve my comments perhaps till later.
Okay. I can't believe it. Can everybody get the date and the time right now? So just a few thoughts. Your presentation was very thorough, actually, certainly educating. But in a very logical way. The education was logical because it's what we assumed, but you broke it down. So I appreciate that. One question I have: did you guys make I don't have a copy of the written report. I don't think. If we can, I don't know if we just have a presentation or are we going to get an actual report or
the detailed report behind all this data. We'll have in about a week, and we'll post that online.
Okay.
Right now, you have the hard copy, and I also wanted to mention that the presentation that we just showed is posted on the website this morning, so the public also has access to it.
And so I noticed, and I'm going to make an assumption here, only because I didn't see it in the presentation. This handy ride and that service was not a part of exploring this.
Yeah, ADA-related services, the service for the disabled under ADA was not part of this study. So.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the study of the fixed route system.
Right. Okay, so I'm gonna divert real quick. Bruce, are we gonna? Do you think it'd be worth it to do some type of study of that service for us
Oh, absolutely. Do you understand some of the gives and takes? So
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay. Maybe we can talk about that offline, but I just want to throw that out there. I want to make sure we're looking at kind of our entire public transit system. So just a couple of thoughts I was going to ask. You talked about some of the less frequently written routes, and as I was looking at the maps, I'm wondering, because it makes sense that the reality is it costs us a lot of money to run a bus to an area where you may only pick up one or two folks, and so that makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering, was there any recommendation or contemplation, or have you ever seen where there are smaller buses or different type of transit that's maybe less expensive to go to those less frequent areas?
What happens in practice is that if a council or policy board makes the decision that we simply can't spend this money on this kind of service anymore, what follows is a conversation between the constituents of that service and the staff about other more cost-effective solutions that the city could perhaps help with in some way short of the massive cost of what you're doing. And this can be, for example, subsidized taxi arrangements. I mean, if it's really a service where a small known constituency is the primary ridership of the service, then you get with that constituency and you look at what can be done with subsidized taxis or whatever. This also, frankly, becomes a warning to people who
I'm really not talking about subsidized taxis.
Right.
Because I'm thinking about a couple of routes in particular, and one, Bruce, is the one that runs out to Willow International. Right. You guys probably looked at that. It's a low frequency route. There are not a lot of folks that are riding out there. It's way out in the middle of nowhere. And although I know that we suggested that they not put it out there, Bruce, I'm going to make sure put that on the record that because of this very issue, but of one of the very issues. But the reality is, I have students that may come from Edison High, and I know some from Fresno High. These young men and women are trying to further their education. They're coming from these areas. This is the only route that they have. So it may be more than a taxi service, but less than a full bus, if you understand what I'm
Here's
saying.
the main caution about that. The cost of running public transit service doesn't have much to do with the size of the bus, because the cost is mostly the driver. And so, the driver's time is generally 70-80% of operating cost. So as a result, many people out there think that we could chop a big bus in half and have two small buses, and no, it doesn't work that way because it's primarily driver cost. So it's really, frankly, the wage rates, the labor arrangements that make one service cheaper than another.
You hear that, Rick?
So,
okay.
For better or worse, that's the mathematical reality of that.
Okay, well,
that's the caution.
Okay, well, thanks for clearing that up, because that was a thought I had to.
But, Councilor, I'd like to just underscore the other comment you made about having made a warning about that location for that development.
Right.
Ultimately, the message of the high ridership network is that people have to take responsibility for their own locations, and that institutions and businesses have to take responsibility for their own locations. And one of the things that happens over time as you build a high-frequency network and advertise it is that people start making location decisions in response to it, so that over time you have fewer of these problems.
Right.
So that's the long-term future. But there is implicit in the idea of a ridership network that just because you located way out there doesn't mean we have to go out there because you chose to locate there. And
right.
That's a difficult thing to think
about.
No,
and this, a couple scenarios are obviously we advised against on the city end for, these reasons and others, and we don't control every entity. So, but the bottom line is, several of us up here, and I know our city manager cares very deeply about coverage and the ability to provide that service to folks. So we're trying to kind of ferret through these issues. Another issue I wanted to chat about was the veterans home coverage. And I don't know if you guys, I know, Bruce, we're supposed to be running coverage out there. I know we have a new transportation director, but since you're here.
Well, again, it comes back to, and that's what the purpose of this workshop was, and subsequently the conversation with the advisory group. We applied for a grant to run buses out to veterans, the new veterans home, but we're not successful in receiving those grant dollars. So that is going to be, again, back to what Jared's talking about, is do you put your resources into areas where you know you have the ability to attract a larger market segment because there's already a market there, or do you allocate resources to serve a facility which may not generate a lot of ridership, but it's more lifeline? And that goes back to land use decisions, whether it's the veterans facility or a community college. People choose to locate a facility off of the grid and then come back later on and expect us to provide service because they got a good deal on land. Community hospital, not community, Valley Children's is a good example of somebody who located the hospital off grid, but they're paying 100% of the cost of providing service. So we'll have to go back and revisit this. The same option may be available to the veterans facility that we offered up to community college. We'll buy you the van because that's the cheapest part of the operation. We'll go out and buy you a 12-passenger van. You go and you provide the service for the veterans. That may be something that we offered that to community college. Of course, they didn't take us up on that opportunity. We can certainly explore that with the veterans facility.
And I think, the remainder of my questions probably are surrounding those types of nuanced scenarios. And I don't want to take up a lot of time, discussing those because this presentation was very helpful in the sense of I think I got context of how a better understanding of how transit works and some of those, the policy contemplation of the decisions. And so I know that the council president and I have been talking about forming, once this presentation was presented, we wanted to be mindful of that. But there's been a lot of discussion about transit around here, as you know, the last couple of months. So council president, I want to know, is it still okay to kind of form that ad hoc council subcommittee to contemplate some of these larger policy decisions in transit and coverage and ridership? Okay.
When we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, we talked about it, and you had talked about waiting until this presentation happened and then convening.
Yeah, it just seemed like it made more sense to see this first and then maybe form the committee. So I wanted to see if that was still. I know it's your prerogative to do that, so I will of course like to volunteer for that committee and whoever else you see fit, Council President. I'd like to form that so we can talk to our transportation department and with the informed study and of course with our labor representatives.
Councilman Olivier.
Thank you very much, Council President. I just have a couple of questions. You're familiar with the Bus Rapid Transit program, obviously, that we put in. In Bus Rapid Transit, I'm assuming that it's apples and oranges when you're talking about, you shared with us you preferred a quarter mile between stops. That doesn't apply to Bus Rapid Transit because we're actually taking stops out to make it
half mile.
So that I'm correct in my understanding that fixed route is different than Bus Rapid Transit. Okay.
Right. BRT is a different trade-off. BRT is about walking even further to much faster service.
Okay. Yeah. I applaud the result of evening service. I think that I've been banging that drum for a long time about evening service, and the examples I use are people in the service industry getting off work and college students. So use the exact same examples that I do. So I think that's great. Are you familiar with the Stockton bus system?
Somewhat, not tremendously, yeah.
Well, in the case where the Bus Rapid Transit, that they run that down the middle of the city, and they don't have the grid system that we do here, so they have to go around the bay, and there's some other things that make it more difficult to move individuals in Stockton. But they use the BRT, and then they use a hopper bus, which is similar to the smaller buses that we use on the Handy Ride, and they call it the hopper. And what that does is they run some of those like this
right
through the city and to the Bus Rapid Transit. So they're using this hopper bus to bring people to the main arteries. So before this council votes to maybe change and abandon some people, I know that I just spoke with, I had a delegation of people in my office that live in the Granville homes. They're disabled. They live in the Granville homes west of 99, so they're your constituents, Council President Brandow. And they can't get to a bus. So they have to use Handy Ride, they have to use a taxi. I also have constituents in my district that work at the El Paseo Shopping Center, which is the next greatest thing in our community, and we don't have transit access to that location. And so my constituents cannot get to their jobs at that location. So would it be possible to add a hopper type system to our system? Maybe if we're going to bring do away with the green lines that you had up there, the 60-minute service, and go to a hopper type of system.
Short answer, I think, is my answer here, which is that if it has a driver and you're paying the driver, it's basically the same.
So it's not the size of the bus.
It's not about the size of the bus. The other thing is that I would mention, just by way of comparison, Stockton is somewhat smaller and rather narrower,
right,
and much more organized around one corridor. Your city is naturally much wider and more gridded. And as a result, you're less likely in Stockton to encounter a corridor like Shaw, which is long and yet perpendicular and has its own long-distance travel going on, perpendicular to what you think of as the main line, whether that's Blackstone or whatever. So I think you have a different geography from Stockton, and ultimately a more powerful geography from Stockton, in that it requires a grid rather than just a focus.
So that wouldn't work.
Yeah, I think it's a geography sufficiently different.
Well, thank you for addressing that. On the issue of the committees, we used to have a transit committee, correct? That made up of community leaders and those kinds of people. Could we reconvene that? I mean, council members looking at it is one thing, but I'm very interested in community participation. I know that the appointment that I have for that, the committee doesn't really meet anymore, or it's been dissolved. But I have an appointment, and this person comes up and says to me, "Oh, Clint, I'm still your appointment, right?" Well, yeah, I mean, you are. Can you address that? Could we reconvene that to have them go over this and then bring recommendations to council?
Well, our preference would be for the council subcommittee. If you want to invite your representative to participate in the dialogue, that's certainly acceptable. But I caution that the last experience with the committee, this is the committee that recommended that the department and the city council adopt fare increases of 25 cents each year, to where within 3 or 4 years, fares would have been at $2 a fare. And that isn't realistic. As we all know, there's a price point when it comes to fares. And there was also an assumption by going to $2 an hour that we would be able to continue to run later at night and some other things which weren't accurate. I think what we're looking for is a policy discussion. And that is, do we maintain the status quo in which about 85% of the service is focusing on providing it's based on frequencies or service levels, biggest bang for your buck. And another 15% is dealing with, as they pointed out, areas that aren't as productive, but it's lifeline. Ashland Avenue, Herndon Avenue, low ridership because of the built environment, but it's more lifeline than anything else. Or from a policy position, do you take any increases, and don't change the system now, but any increases in revenue going forward are put into either additional coverage or put into increasing frequencies which attract a higher level of ridership. We need to get past that policy discussion first, because if we don't have that first, then we're shooting at multiple targets at the same time.
Thank you, City Manager. A couple of more quick questions, because I want others to speak before we go to lunch. But the condition of the bus stops is really deplorable in this city. Is it possible to re-sign them and give them a facelift, given the current fax budget situation, as part of this? I mean, is that even on the table, because the consultant recommended that we re-sign?
Oh, it's very much on the table. I actually leaned over, made an assumption. I'll follow up that whenever Jared took that picture, I would have hoped that this time that plexiglass would have at least been replaced. I'm not sure it has. So improving the level of passenger amenities is an absolute priority. There is funding within the fax budget under their capital to, and as council has approved recently, we have improvements to our passenger amenities. We're replacing shelters again. We had, for whatever reason, postponed, stalled, whatever happened. So we're replacing shelters. We're replacing benches. We're looking at ways to improve our downtown shelter. Council's approved a contract recently that we're in the design and engineering for A, B, and L. But like a lot of our facilities, we can do a lot better. We're just now taking data, a lot of data that Tony and Jared use for this to look at, are there places where we need to increase the level of amenities because of changes in travel patterns. So it is absolutely one of those things that's at the top of the list and is funded in next year's budget.
Thank you, City Manager. I'm also concerned about the I guess, lack of landing pads, and I know we voted to put those in, and we did, but then there's still some potholes out there where the buses land to stop. Thank you.
I will just add on that point that the fewer stops you have, the cheaper this will be. So this is part of the stop spacing proposal, if you think about it, to have somewhat fewer stops with somewhat better infrastructure.
And then running it like a business, I think that I would love to run everything like a business because that's how I think. But I've learned that in government, this is the opposite of a business. And every election cycle, we see people come through and, I'm going to run it like a business. I understand that 80 cents on every dollar that FACTS takes in is subsidized by the other government entities. So we're only making 20 cents on the dollar at the fare box. In private industry, that equals failure. So without subsidy, we cannot run this operation. So we have to ask ourselves, and I know that my colleague and friend Steve Brandow and I talk about this, we have to ask ourselves, are we providing the bus for public safety, or are we trying to turn a profit and make money for our shareholders? I mean, that's rejected automatically because it's impossible. This is a public service that we provide, a social service to move our constituents so they can get to work and improve their lives and go to school and just like those who drive, who have their own personal automobile. So I automatically reject that we can think like a business because we can't. We have to provide the best government public service that we can possibly provide with the money that we're allotted. And so that's where I'm at on that. So, and I guess I have some other stuff too, but I know that this is not a topic that is going away anytime soon. I know we're going to debate it and discuss it quite a bit. So with that, thank you so much for the good work you've done. I'm going to go through it. I love studying transit issues, and so I'll be digesting this. Thank you.
Councilman Brand.
A few questions. This policy, this plan, we'll decide in a couple of months, correct? That's and I'm curious, since we had this big debate a few months ago on BRT, and BRT actually also interfaces with our 2035 general plan. So what we're doing here, I'm assuming, has to be consistent with two decisions or one decision made already on BRT, and at least a partial decision, preliminary decision on the 2035 general plan, because that is based on a transit corridors high intensity model, and it seems like if we take one of these options, depending on how far we go with it as far as the service, would actually be contrary to the general plan, correct? And essentially the BRT, that's an essential component of the general plan. Am I right?
Well, yes, fundamentally, and we did this work, we as an exercise, we set the BRT aside because it was its own conversation, and we needed to help you have a conversation about the total bus system. So just for the purposes of this exercise, we kind of set the BRT project aside. But yes, fundamental to the BRT project is frequency. And what I would observe in what's tending to happen in other cities is that even as a rapid transit service is starting to appear, land use planning over time comes to evolve around a couple of tiers of transit service. The highest order of which might be BRT or light rail where they have light rail, but the step down from that being just the frequent bus network. And so what this provides, actually that becomes very important, for example, in places where land values start to rise to the point that not everyone can afford to be on the best line, and you need something at a different price point that can't necessarily be at the most convenient place. And so land use planning that takes into an account all the price points that you'll ultimately have to be serving has to have a tiered structure. And one of the crucial things in that tiered structure is the ordinary frequent network, the red lines on this map, if you were to be able to choose that map, which give you some additional opportunities for lower scale, but still some intensification in response to just the knowledge that there's transit coming all the time, even though it's not as fast as BRT.
Yeah, and the other element of the general plan are the activity centers, which, they've been identified, like Fashion Fair, Fresno State, River Park, trying to tie in, that activity and also the east-west traffic, for example, along Shaw Avenue. Just thinking, logically, in terms of trying to use a model that ties in use and destination. And I would assume there's a correlation between identifying geographic areas that are low income, would probably be people that would have less car ownership, would be more inclined to use public transportation. And even demographics from certain areas would have a younger population. With a younger population of, let's say, 6 to 18 years old, you can have more students. I've identified the three groups that primarily use the transit now, correct?
That's who primarily uses transit now. As
Right.
transit improves, its ridership becomes more diverse.
Okay.
But certainly at this stage, that would be the dominant elements of your ridership. Yeah.
And you're linking those demographics to employment centers, schools, entertainment, medical, those types of things. So it really, this is a kind of a classic, a quandary for us. Do you try to make those services available to those people that would have the need because they don't own a car, they go to school, or try to, get more people to use the transit for air quality and other considerations? And it looks like we're coming into these decisions here that are going to impact, one way or the other, which way we go. And is the city manager, is there a preferred model that the administration has?
Well, I can tell you that our ridership scenario is based on our general plan. It's consistent with our general plan. It's consistent in the investments that we've been pursuing, everything from BRT to recently receiving an award to operate improved frequencies on Shaw Avenue. The goal to reduce VMTs is certainly a cornerstone of our general plan. So the administration's position is that we want to continue to invest in those corridors where we have the highest return on those investments.
Okay, so you really would be leaning towards the ridership model, right?
Right, and if you look at the general plan makes it very clear that that's
Right.
where we're focusing and want to focus our resources.
And the two choices, Kings Canyon and Blackstone, were the two most productive routes, correct? Highest used? Really, the final tie-in is the financial tie-in, and I think Member Olivier really said it well, that it's impossible for us to have a system that's going to pay for itself. I don't think any city in the world has a public transportation system that pays for itself. And based on the modeling that you provided, City Manager, in the BRT, assuming we even got halfway close to it, there's really no issue here as far as general fund of having, if we chose a model, for example, we want to take the extreme and provide every service, every corner. Clinton mentioned one time bringing a bus from Tower, Manchester to El Paso, on Herndon and 99, where you might have 3 people going a day, and on a bus of 100 or 80 people capacity, that it's virtually impossible to do that. I think to reach the point where you'd actually blow through all your funds, because only 20% of the funding is fares anyway, right?
Right. So
the rest is federal grants, although you'd have higher operation costs because you're logging more miles, right? More labor, more gas, more wear and tear,
Right.
correct? So from a cost efficiency point of view, clearly the ridership model demonstrates that probably the closest move towards a business model, right?
Right.
Although I can understand, too, in our city, we have to have somewhat of a compromise to accommodate people that do need the transportation. But then again, is it better to have Blackstone every 15 minutes from 8 a.m. to midnight, or to have Blackstone from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. every half hour, but open up 3 other routes, right?
That's
our dilemma. And I know a lot of the council members here, my district really doesn't have the issue as far as, most people own cars, they're not using public transportation. But I know a big portion of the city depends on public transportation. And I know what I heard during the debate on BRT, there's people that get off of work at 8 o'clock at night. They want to have a reliable transportation system, or they want to go from point A to point B, and it takes 2 hours, and it's too long. So it's good that we're having this discussion. I think it's really good for the city, but I can see whatever decision we make has got to be well thought out to really best serve the city. Thank you.
I have a comment on that. So if you do increase your ridership, you are serving more citizens. You're just serving less geography, and that's a distinction that we hope to bring out in making a more efficient system. It's not just about the bottom line. You are using public resources to serve more of your citizens. So,
Councilman Quintero.
Thank you, Mr. President. A couple of things I wanted to ask. You said that in 2013 there was outreach of 30 stakeholder interviews, and what was your stakeholder folks? Retired students or?
We have a complete list of that I can share with you, and we'll make it available to you. It's
okay. And also, on those stakeholders, were they identified in terms of what areas they lived in of the city?
There was a distribution, yes, of council members here in Clovis also, and universities, and I'll get you the full list.
Okay, yes. Appreciate it. And then also is on your major origins and destinations, I guess, you listed number 2 as Fresno Pacific University as one of the major destinations. And maybe what I'm thinking is part of that has to do with the area around the university, which not only encompasses the students, but we have one of the largest senior citizen complex tied right next to it, and there's another one behind it and another one behind that. They're all right within that area, and that is probably what increases the numbers. And I think that's Route 28 in there that goes through there. And so as I was looking at the pie, you put down retired 4% and disabled 11%. So probably I know that a good number, I live right by there, a good number of those in those senior citizen housing, a good number are disabled. So, I kind of combine those to about 15% if you put the disabled with the retired, that in terms of the ridership. And what I'm headed toward is that one of the things that I saw here that you had in your in the I guess recommendations or the cost effectiveness to improve coverage is that, and I guess this is more a question for Bruce, is, it's been some years since we've had it, but it still continues to come up, is the revival of Route 12. How realistic is that, Bruce, in terms of it coming back? Or that was very effective with the seniors, and of course the number of seniors is increased in that area.
Well, that comes back to the ridership versus coverage.
Yes.
While it was popular, the average ridership per hour was like 2.5 riders per hour. So when you compared that to ridership that's eclipsing 30 or 40 passengers per hour, that's what this demonstrates. If you wanted to, as a policy, put money into some coverage area versus the ridership scenario, then that's how you would serve Northeast Fresno as well as the senior citizen village. Conversely, if increasing frequencies on Route 38, which serves Fresno State, a number of the high schools along that corridor, then you take those same resources and you put it into increasing frequencies on Route 38, which attracts a higher level of ridership and a higher return on fare box. At 2.5 passengers per hour, you can imagine what your fare box recovery is when you're charging $1 for a trip, but your operating costs are hovering somewhere around $40 an hour.
Uh-huh. And what year was that discontinued, John or Bruce?
I believe it was discontinued about 3 to 4 years ago, when we also started curtailing frequencies and the hours of operation.
Yeah, that was also with the hit we got on the economy,
right,
when that was discontinued. Well, I know since that time we've had, like I said, increased senior housing. We're looking at another big complex coming up across from the Walmart area there, and then hopefully the soon to be built Fancher Creek Shopping Center, which would also, I don't know if that might be considered or thought of as part of Route 12 as well for the seniors. We've got 5 senior citizen rest homes within.
The good news, as you know, council member, is that new senior complex is being contemplated. One of the attractions for the developer was that it was located on the BRT corridor.
Exactly.
And that same thing applies to Fancher Creek.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned Route 12 to them, and they like that idea as well. So I told them they could help us fund. I told them they could help us fund part of that. And then there's also, I don't know if you took into account that some parts of the city have special events that would increase the ridership certain times of the year. A good example is we have the big Fresno Fair, which we get 500,000 plus people come to that, and a good portion are ride the bus to get there. That's one big one. And then we have a big employer right in that southeast area that during the tax season, it runs 24/7 is the IRS complex that's there. And I don't know if there was any interviews done with them in terms of what folks might be interested in, and if they were aware that there was a bus service in the late night to get them home as well. So I mean, all those numbers changed from 4 to 5 years ago as well. But just wanted to, and then I'll look forward to getting that report from you and see if there's any other information on some of the things that I touched on, because we had the one senior complex went from like about 60% occupancy to now they have a waiting list just in that short 3 or 4 years, and it's right in that area as well. So, okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Councilman Capriolio.
Thank you. A couple of questions. The Fresno Transit Agency 90/10 ridership coverage seems to be a good thing.
Well, it's where you are now, essentially. That's if I sort of psychoanalyze your existing system and try to figure out what it's trying to do based on what it's doing, I was going to say that about 90% of your service is where it would be if you were running a 100% ridership system. The other 10% isn't, and so that's what I call the coverage service. That's the dashed lines on that map, which are the things that would disappear if you went to 100% ridership. So
what I'm trying to get at is that the service is the key and the dream is 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. Why aren't we at 15 minutes? If we have the proper ratio, perhaps, of 90/10, why aren't we at 15 minutes?
You're not at 15 minutes right now because the cost of, I take you back to the existing system, because the cost of running the coverage that you're running, because you have only 90% of the budget instead of 100% of the budget to spend on ridership, that you can't afford to get these 20-minute lines up to 15, right? So when you go from spending 90% of your budget on ridership to hypothetically 100, that extra 10%, which is now being spent going out West Herndon, going out East Ashland, going to the far northeast, going to Malaga, instead gets spent on turning those frequencies up.
And you mentioned that running a special bus from, at, say, 7:30 to 8:30 or 4:30 to 5:30 would not be very efficient?
Well, a special bus for what purpose? You mean?
Well, to get people to work downtown or the north area or wherever.
The issue is not really the conventional 9 to 5 peak. There's not very much 9 to 5 peaking because the current system is used most heavily by people who are in retail, service, student sectors where jobs don't run 9 to 5. So that you go to cut off of work at all kinds of different times, and so because of that you have a remarkably unpeaked, flat demand pattern across the day, which is good for transit. It's very efficient for you to serve. And as peaks, as transit becomes more relevant, if you choose to grow transit in the city, and it becomes more relevant to a greater spectrum of people, you'll probably see more 9 to 5 people starting to use it, and then that will be a point where it will make sense to think more about those demands. But a lot of that demand can be absorbed on the main system. But right now, the ridership pattern isn't telling us to turn up service, particularly at a particular time of day. It's telling us that it's very even across the long day.
Is there any way to tell the number of people that actually ride the bus as opposed to percentage of ridership? Those can get more specific.
Oh, sure. I mean, there's ridership data for every route. The percentage, for every route, we have information on how many people get on, every route at every trip, every time of day. Yeah, you can drill down into all of that. What we did here was to take the 90% of the system where that number is very high and say, okay, what if we took the other 10% and spent it more like this along these lines? And that's how you got the ridership scenario with the higher frequencies, as opposed to a coverage scenario, which obviously goes the other way.
Yeah, there were some questions about BRT and the compatibility of the two. Was that addressed at all as far as?
Well, there's very high compatibility. In any case, BRT drops right into these networks, replacing the Blackstone and Kings Canyon pieces, and everything else is as you see it. So, that's the Blackstone and Kings Canyon corridors are assumed to be easily replaced by BRT without really affecting the rest of the network.
And that has an impact on the ridership versus coverage question?
Well, not really. As we just sort of set that issue aside. Yes, BRT is a separate ridership improving thing you're doing, kind of separate project over here. What we were doing here was an exercise to understand the potential of all the rest of the network and all the rest of the city. And so obviously Blackstone and Kings Canyon are in here. They're in here as bus routes because, quite honestly, we wanted something that was separate from your BRT debate and not dependent on your BRT debate. We wanted to be able to help you have a conversation about the whole rest of the bus system. Certainly, as you develop BRT on Blackstone and Kings Canyon, the ridership scenario is also better for the ridership of BRT because it brings more people to BRT. For example, having 15-minute service on Shaw, which you get in the ridership scenario, as opposed to 30-minute service, which you have now, is a huge benefit to the BRT because it brings more people to Blackstone and gets them onto the BRT corridor. So that's another impact.
And then I had a question on the cost of your services. Maybe Bruce could answer that. But for your services for this study, do you know how much money we spent for that?
I only know about my little piece of it, so I'm going to
Thank you.
refer to the whole thing.
The contract was approximately $250,000, which was paid for by the Council of Governments.
That's the COG.
The COG.
So it did come out of our general fund, or
Didn't come out of the general fund. Didn't come from Fax's operating. It was funded by a planning grant from the Council of Government.
Perfect. I think that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Councilman Quintero?
Yeah, there was one question I forgot to ask. On your stakeholders meeting, did you have some good input from the ADA folks, ADA commission?
There was some outreach to them, and I'm not sure what you mean good.
Some outreach?
Yes.
Okay. You don't know how much?
I don't know how much, no.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Olivier.
I wanted to offer Rick Stites an opportunity. Have you reconsidered? Would you like to say something? I knew it. You're going to get the last word.
I don't think so.
Well, today anyway.
Just to remind one of my council friends up here that the cost of driving the bus hasn't gone up in 7 years, and as a matter of fact, it's gone down 3% for drivers. But nevertheless, as I said before, I viewed this a couple months ago, and my response was, when I was asked which preference I had, was both. There's probably not enough money to do both. Fresno is a sprawling city. It continues to sprawl. I still drive a bus a couple hours a week, and the input I get back is from riders. And they're constantly asking us, how or when are we going to get additional bus service to portions of the city of Fresno that don't have that service now? I understand what this project is focusing on, but you're increasing the service to perhaps generate more ridership, but on the other side of the coin, you're taking away ridership from, it's low producing, true, but you're taking away accessibility to other parts of the city. If you don't have accessibility, people aren't going to ride the bus. The BRT comments a couple months ago, there were people who lived in central Fresno who had jobs out at El Paseo. The bus stops an hour or a mile short of that. There has to be some type of a formula, perhaps. Certainly, I believe that the service does need to continue to expand. I understand the proposal here of increasing frequencies will perhaps generate more ridership, but at the same time, you're precluding other citizens from the ability to use the system. The map up here, Northwest Fresno, is going to lose almost all of its bus service. Mr. Caprielio's district will lose a good portion of it, and Mr. Quintero's will be curtailed going down to Highway City. And I know one of his concerns was trying to get more service, the circulator, back into southeast Fresno. I don't see it being here. It's a complex issue that needs some time. I hope this committee that was talked to a couple months ago is formed before the council goes forward and makes any decision on which way they prefer to go. Fresno's a big city. It's continuing to grow. My view is you still need to have the ability to get to the outskirts. If you don't provide that, they're not going to ride it. And as bus drivers, we are continuing to get asked, how can we get there? You can't. When will you? Don't know. To be discussed further. Thanks.
All right. Looks like the screen is clear. I'm just going to ask a few questions. Tony, was going to ask you, on the community outreach part, is there still opportunity for some of that to happen, or is that kind of in the past here? If a council member felt like they wanted somebody to hear and participate, could they either organize a meeting, or do you have any meetings left where they could send people to?
We don't have any scheduled meetings at the moment. We have been talking to John about that, and we have potential to do a couple of more meetings.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's some potential there if we want to get involved and help and maybe send some people. All right. Cool. Yep. Let's see. Okay. You know, I was the only no vote, the final no vote on bus rapid transit. But I remember that one of the main benefits or arguments for bus rapid transit was for land use along the bus rapid transit corridors, land use commitments as well as transportation commitments. And I really shouldn't even be arguing for those commitments today, but if we're ever going to see land use grow along these corridors, I think we'd have to give bus rapid transit that opportunity to succeed in what its goal is, which is to create a fast bus system where people feel like they can get to that spot fast. Maybe they're not going to get out to El Paseo fast, but the people traveling the heavy quote heavy corridors, density corridors, they should feel like they're going to get there fast. So I liked what Jarrett said kind of towards the end of his remarks. Or you know what? Maybe it wasn't Jarrett. I don't know for sure. But somebody said increasing this ridership headways is actually serving more citizens. So it's not like one is serving less citizens because it's being run by a business. It's actually being run like a business. It's actually serving more citizens because it's being run like a business. Now, I might have oversimplified that. Is that what you guys were trying to say?
If you increase your productivity and you're getting more efficiency out of it, yes.
Okay. Now, if we want... So what happens is all of us council members, here's what real life is like. And these guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but we get a phone call. Councilman Brandow, I live way out on the other side of west of 99, but I'm in District 2, and I really need to ride the bus because I've got to get to somewhere. And can you do anything about that? And then I start to get a wave of depression over myself, but I don't tell them that. And I hang up the phone and I say, let me talk to some people about it. I'll get back to you. But the truth is, we've got a very difficult time telling that person yes, because it's a huge cost of money to get out and get that one person and bring them to wherever they want. So we get put under pressure by constituents. And so then what happens if I'm trying to represent that person, I'll call Bruce, in the past it's been Bruce, or I'll call somebody in transportation and say, hey, what are the odds of getting out here west of 99 with a bus? And then I get told, real slim. and so then I've got to call that person back and let them down, or say, at some point in the future, maybe we can do it, but it's real difficult. So we get a lot of pressure on us, and I know different councilmen get more pressure probably than I do in Northwest Fresno. So it's really tough when we want to do the best thing for some citizens. But in all reality, I don't know how we can do everything like Rick mentioned a few minutes ago in his comment. It'd be wonderful to do everything. I just don't know how we get it done. So if 15-minute headways, which is the most similar to bus rapid transit, which is you get this concept out there that people feel like at any time I can go out on a Blackstone and within a few minutes I'm going to catch a bus, okay? But if that's the bus rapid transit model and this gets facts closest to that, then that actually serves the most customers. I'm kind of leaning that direction with the presentation you've made today. But, of course, I see Herndon Avenue. Clint, not only will we not be expanding to El Paseo, oh, he's not here, that's probably good. Not only will we not be going out to El Paseo, we're going to possibly eliminate bus service on Herndon, and you're essentially saying this is a supply and demand. There's not enough demand to keep the supply on Herndon Avenue. Am I oversimplifying again? Is that correct?
Qualify it. There is demand out there, but compared to the rest of the system, you're not getting the bang for your buck that you could for the rest of the system.
And that is a predictable outcome based on the built environment. It's not a surprise. That's the other thing that I think is important to be really clear about. We understand what aspects of the built environment create good transit markets. And we can look at West Herndon. We can see the wide spacing of signals. We can see the sound walls that make it hard to walk out to the street, see the overall density, and all of those. And, we don't actually have to go to demographics, by the way. We don't even have to look at income. It's just the built environment, really. Is it even possible for many people to get out to this bus route and find it useful?
Mm-hmm.
It's entirely predictable that that's a low ridership service. And I have to disagree with Rick. Cutting a very low ridership service does not affect your system-wide ridership. You're cutting not very many. And we can recognize from the built environment whether something is a potential ridership corridor or not. That's pretty well understood. And I've tried to describe it to you: density, walkability, linearity.
Okay. A couple of questions have come up about senior citizen complexes. And some of them that I've worked for in the past, they have their own smaller bus service that they operate. Is that still really common, or is there a lot of demand from senior services on our public transportation?
In my experience, the senior, as we know, people are living longer, but they're also remaining active at later in life, and so there's an increasing demand for a range of choices for seniors. And I think it's great that you have senior facilities being built right adjacent to BRT stations where seniors are going to have that kind of really high-quality freedom, as opposed to being dependent on your own, bus whenever it goes. Still, the fundamental issue is really the location decisions being made about senior housing and senior facilities. If they are located in places where we can recognize that the built environment doesn't make transit work, then seniors can call you up all you want. What seniors are asking for in that case is coverage service. They are asking for something that comes at the expense of ridership. And just like anyone else who's requesting a service to a place where we know that transit ridership potential is not clear.
Right. In Bruce's comments, and I think he was responding to Oliver about the Veterans Center. He talked about we could supply them a bus if they could supply the driver. Have any municipalities ever done successfully stuff like that?
Yes.
They have. Okay. But we haven't done that in Fresno yet. We offered it to a school, but it didn't happen, Bruce, or what?
Well, it happened a long time ago. Once upon a time, interesting because I didn't know about it, neither did anybody else. At one time, the city of Fresno bought the Senior Citizens Village, a van. And after that van got to be about 12 years old, they came in and looked for us to buy them another van. So we've done it once that I'm aware of, and that's what I'm talking about. You don't need a bus. You can get your typical 8 or 12 passenger van, and we could certainly enter into an agreement with the veterans or with City College or whoever and say, listen, it's just not cost effective for us to operate a bus on our headways or anything else. And it would probably be more cost effective especially if you take a van and spread that life cycle cost over 8-9 years, because they don't go as far, so they tend to go a little bit longer. It's cheaper to provide that van and spread that capital over an extended period than to try to keep running buses out to some place. And what you need is a partnership. You need someone to be able to underwrite the costs and the liability of operating that van, the gas, the driver, the insurance, et cetera. But it is an option that we could certainly explore with the council.
Because some of these, like Willow International, I keep hearing about that, and that does make sense. I would like, maybe we need to talk with Willow International then, because hypothetically, if we change this bus system in the months to come, and we create faster headways, we could connect a shuttle bus out to Willow International. We could hypothetically provide them the bus. They could provide the driver. Mm-hmm. And connect them to the grid that we currently... The offer's
still on the table.
Offer's on the table. All right, cool. All right, I think that's it. I think it's a excellent presentation you guys put together. I know you've started late last summer or something like that. Isn't that correct? So been anticipating it. Took a while, but it's worth it. I think seems pretty thorough. So we appreciate it. Tony and Jarrett and Bruce and John as well. And so I think that I might have a few people that I would like to send to a workshop. So I might work with other council members to see if we could get another community workshop where we could all send people who would like to hear this information, that maybe they have one last chance to make comments. So, all right. Well, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. We are now done with the public portion of our day. We're going to go into closed session, but I want to remind everybody. No, we did that already.
Would you like me to announce the closed session?
Is that my choice?
I'm sorry?
We take comments on closed session?
Yes, before going into labor closed session, public comment is allowed.
Okay, good point then. We have comments on closed session, public comments on closed session.
Right, we have conference with labor negotiator concerning all of the listed bargaining units, and I would not expect an announcement afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. City Attorney. I see you're on your job. Thank you. We're going in closed session. We got all these people, the police and all these unions. We got millions of dollars up here, and we can't even take care of the police union. Where am I at? And this place wasn't even supposed to be on the agenda. Only the mayor supposed to spoke. We got the City of Fresno Management Employee Association. We got the City of Fresno Professional Employee Association. We got IUOE, Stationary Engineering, Local 39L39. We got Fresno City Employee Association, FCEA. We got Fresno Police Officer Association, FPOB Basic. We got International Association for Firefighters, Local 753. Fire Basics. We got Alameda Transit Union, Local 1027 ATU. We got International Brotherhood of Electoral Workers Union 100. We got International Police Officers Association Management. We got International Association of Fire Department Local 153 Fire Management. We got Fresno Airport Public Safety Supervisors. How come we can't tell the people what we're going to close session about and you don't want to let nobody know? This is what I'm saying. When I come to the city hall up here, they say nothing's going to be on here but the mayor's presentation. I took a chance of coming up here on my own. I see all this stuff going on the agenda and nobody has the opportunity to speak on this. I got the same dress I had on when I'm at work in my house. And you guys will slip this thing on, but you can't fool me. And Mr. Bowell, you cannot be a president when you're not knowing what you're doing. And we got people coming up here from all areas. We got Mr. Bong's people. Where's the Asians at? Where's the Hispanics at? Where's the black people at? Where's the white folks at? They're supposed to be here and listen because it's not on the agenda for us to be here. You guys not doing your job, but you can't fool me. God is my boss, like I tell you. You work for the Tea Party. They should fire you and get rid of you, and I'll be glad when they do. Thank you very much, Mr. City Attorney, and I love you for that because you know. Tell them something. All except Sal, he knows a lot, but and Mr. Brand and Mr. Caparillo, these are some good people up in here. But Mr. Banks, Mr. Olivia, and Mr. Ong, I never seen an Asian up in here until I brought him up here. And I had this place full of Hmongs up in here with that International New Year. They was fighting over the territory. He ain't brought one. Bangs ain't brought nobody. Olivia, he don't run for something. He ain't brought nobody. How you going to bring in the office and he don't bring the people up here to see what goes on in this place? Thank you once again, Mr. Sloan. And I'm going to stay for the next part because it's going to be a next part of this agenda.
Perfect. All right, now we are going into closed session. I want to remind everybody that we're adjourning our meeting today in honor of Joyce Robbins.